Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September at 2:17 a.m. I was still awake, sitting in the field office in Baton Rouge, drinking a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier. When the dispatcher's voice crackled over the speaker, I sensed that particular tension, the kind that signaled something was seriously wrong. "Agent Rowan, we have a problem." The last signal from federal confidential informant Marcus Landry came in at 1:52 a.m., 40 miles south of Baton Rouge, near Bayou Sorrel. The dispatcher's voice trailed off. GPS coordinates are fixed but immobile. No response to calls for the last 23 minutes. I set my coffee cup on the table and felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Marcus Landry had been my confidential informant for 18 months. Providing us with information about a drug trafficking gang operating in the Louisiana swamps. During active surveillance, he was required to report every 6 hours. The loss of his signal was not only alarming, but potentially catastrophic. "Any last transmission?" I asked, already reaching for my jacket. "Audio only. Dispatch recorded it." There was a clicking sound, then static. Then Marcus's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Something's not right out here. The water. There's movement in the water. Not a gator, something else." A pause, heavy breathing. "I'm going to..." Then, nothing. Just the wet sound of something dragging across a surface, like fabric pulled through mud. Then the line went dead. I was in my vehicle within 3 minutes, heading south on Highway 1 with emergency lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The September heat hadn't broken yet, and even at this hour the air felt thick and damp against my skin. As I drove, I tried to raise Marcus on every available channel. Nothing came back except static, and the occasional garbled word that might have been interference, or might have been something else entirely. The GPS coordinates led me to a boat launch near Pierre Part, where the road ended and the bayou began. I'd been out here before during an earlier phase of the investigation, but never this deep and never alone. The launch was deserted, except for my vehicle and one other, a rusted pickup truck that I recognized as belonging to Marcus. His boat was gone. I pulled out my tactical flashlight and swept it across the launch area. The beam caught fresh tire tracks in the mud, recently made, leading down to where the water lapped against the concrete ramp. But there was something else, too. Drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled from the truck bed to the water's edge. The marks were irregular, not like a boat trailer would make. More organic somehow. The air smelled wrong. Bayou water always has that particular scent. A mix of decay and life, mud and vegetation. But this was different, sharper, almost metallic, like old blood mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. I've been doing this work for 12 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about smell. This smell was telling me to turn around. Instead, I called it in. "Dispatch, Agent Rowan, I'm at the Pierre Part launch. Subject's vehicle is here, but no sign of subject, requesting backup in a search boat." The response came back within seconds. "Copy that, Agent Rowan. Closest backup is 40 minutes out. Marine unit is 2 hours minimum. Do you want to wait for support?" I looked out at the dark water, knowing that every minute counted if Marcus was still alive out there. The GPS coordinates placed his last known location about 3 miles into the swamp, following the cypress-lined channels that wound through the marsh like veins. 3 miles wasn't far by land, but in a Louisiana swamp at 3 in the morning, it might as well have been another country. "Negative," I said. "I'm going in. I'll maintain radio contact." I should have waited. That's what the protocols say, what my training demanded. But Marcus was my responsibility, and if there was even a chance he was alive, injured, waiting for help in that black water, I couldn't justify sitting on my hands for 2 hours while a Marine unit mobilized. There was a rental agency next to the launch that kept a few aluminum boats chained up for fishermen. I knew the owner, a man named Boudreaux, who'd helped us before. I called him, woke him up, explained the situation. He gave me permission to take one of the boats and the location of the key. Within 10 minutes, I had a 12-foot aluminum boat in the water with a small outboard motor attached. The motor started on the third pull, coughing blue smoke into the humid air. I loaded my gear, weapon, radio, flashlight, first aid kit, GPS unit, and pushed off from the launch. The boat rocked as it found its equilibrium in the dark water, and for a moment, I just sat there, feeling the vastness of the swamp opening up around me like a living thing. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating a narrow channel between towering cypress trees. Spanish moss hung from the branches like gray curtains, perfectly still in the windless air. The water was black as oil, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. I could see about 20 feet ahead before the light simply stopped, swallowed by the darkness. I followed the GPS coordinates, keeping the motor at low throttle to minimize noise. The channel twisted and turned, splitting into smaller channels that split again, creating a maze of waterways that all looked identical in the dark. Without the GPS, I would have been hopelessly lost within minutes. The cypresses crowded closer on both sides, their knobby roots breaking the water's surface like knuckles. After about a mile, I cut the motor to listen. The silence was immediate and total. No birds, no insects, no sound of wind or water moving. Just a dead, heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. I tried the radio again. "Dispatch, Agent Rowan. I'm approximately 1 mile in, heading southwest toward subject's last known position. Radio check." The response came back broken and distorted. "Opie. Rowan. Signal. Weak?" I repeated the transmission, but got only static in return. Not unusual in the swamp. The dense vegetation and the minerals in the water could play hell with radio signals, but it added another layer of isolation to an already tense situation. I restarted the motor and continued deeper into the bayou. The channel narrowed further until the cypress branches nearly met overhead, blocking out what little starlight penetrated the cloud cover. My flashlight beam became the only source of illumination, and I found myself checking behind me more and more frequently, unable to shake the feeling that something was following just beyond the reach of the light. At the 2-mile mark, I saw the first sign of Marcus, a piece of his equipment, a waterproof document bag we'd issued him, floating in the water near the base of a large cypress. I cut the motor and drifted closer, using an oar to fish the bag out of the water. It was open, empty, the seal broken. Marcus wouldn't have opened it out here unless something had gone seriously wrong. I played the flashlight beam across the surrounding water, looking for any other signs. That's when I noticed the marks on the cypress trunk. Long, parallel gouges in the bark, fresh enough that the wood underneath still showed pale and raw. 4 marks, evenly spaced, starting about 3 feet above the waterline and dragging down, like something with claws had tried to climb the tree, or pull itself up from the water. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Louisiana gators don't climb trees, and even if they did, their claws don't make marks like that. These were too deliberate, too evenly spaced, almost like fingers. I checked the GPS. Marcus's last known position was less than half a mile ahead, where the channel opened into a wider area marked on the map as Cypress Sink. I'd never been there before, but I'd heard the local fishermen talk about it. A deep pool surrounded by ancient cypress trees. A place where the water was said to be over 30 feet deep in the center. They said things got lost in Cypress Sink. Boats, equipment, people. The water had a current there that pulled things down and never gave them back. As I approached the sink, the channel widened gradually, the cypress trees spreading out to form a rough circle around a pool of dark water. The surface was perfectly still, like glass, reflecting the beam of my flashlight back at me. I cut the motor again and let the boat drift into the open area. "Marcus," I called out, my voice sounding small and flat in the open air. "Marcus Landry, can you hear me? It's Agent Rowan." Nothing. Not even an echo. The sound just died, absorbed by the water and the trees as if it had never existed. I checked the GPS again. The coordinates placed Marcus's last signal right here, in the center of Cypress Sink. I played my flashlight across the water, looking for any sign of him or his boat. The beam caught something near the far edge of the sink, a shape that didn't belong. I paddled closer, my heart rate climbing. It was Marcus's boat, or what was left of it. The aluminum hull was crumpled inward on one side, as if something had grabbed it and crushed it like a beer can. It was partially submerged, the bow pointing up at an angle, while the stern sat below the waterline. There was no sign of Marcus. I brought my boat alongside and examined the damage more closely. The metal was bent inward in a pattern that made no sense, not like it had hit a submerged log or rock, but like it had been squeezed by something with tremendous force. The edges of the torn metal were sharp and clean, as if whatever had done this had punched through the hull from outside. Inside the boat, I found Marcus's radio and his weapon, both still secured in their cases. If he'd abandoned ship, he'd done it so quickly that he hadn't grabbed either one. There was also his phone, the screen cracked but still powered on. I picked it up carefully, noting the water damage but hoping it might still hold some information. The phone's lock screen showed 1:47 a.m., 5 minutes before his last transmission. I tried to unlock it, but the screen was too damaged to respond to touch. I bagged it as evidence, making a mental note to have the tech team pull whatever data they could from it. That's when I heard it. A sound from somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. It started low, almost subsonic. A rumble that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Then it rose in pitch, becoming something between a groan and a hiss. Wet, organic, utterly unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I spun the flashlight towards the sound, but the beam showed nothing except dark water and the black silhouettes of cypress trees. The sound continued for several seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Agent Rowan. I've located subject's boat. Vessel is damaged and subject is not on board. Requesting immediate assistance and marine unit at Cypress Sink coordinates." I read off the GPS numbers. The radio crackled back with broken words. "OP, sending, caution. They're strange. Repeat, last, dispatch. You're breaking up. Other team, sink, years, never." The transmission dissolved into static. I tried several more times to raise them, but got nothing except white noise. I was effectively on my own. I made a decision. I would do a quick perimeter search of Cypress Sink, looking for any sign of Marcus, then return to the launch and wait for backup. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Just a systematic search of the immediate area, then retreat. I started paddling around the perimeter of the sink, playing my flashlight beam across the water and into the trees. The beam caught occasional glimpses of movement, something sliding into the water, a ripple that moved against the current. shadows that seemed to shift position when I wasn't looking directly at them. Each time, my hand went to my weapon, but there was never anything solid to aim at. I was about halfway around the perimeter when I saw the light. It appeared without warning, maybe 50 yards away, deep in the cypress trees on the far side of the sink. A pale, blue-green glow, hovering about 6 feet above the water, perfectly stationary. It wasn't a flashlight. The quality of the light was wrong, too diffuse, too steady, and it made no sense for anyone else to be out here at this hour. "Federal agent," I called out. "Identify yourself." The light didn't move, didn't respond, just hung there in the darkness like a malevolent eye, watching me. I started the motor and headed toward it, keeping my flashlight trained on the glow. As I got closer, I could see that it wasn't attached to anything. It simply floated in the air between the trees, casting no shadows, illuminating nothing around it. The color reminded me of foxfire, the bioluminescent fungi that sometimes grew on rotting wood, but foxfire doesn't float, and it doesn't glow that brightly. When I was about 20 yards away, the light moved. It didn't bob or drift like something suspended in air. It shot sideways with sudden violent speed, disappearing behind a cluster of cypress trees. I swung the boat to follow it, but when I came around the trees there was nothing there. The light was gone. I killed the motor again and listened. For a moment there was only silence. Then I heard it, a sound like wet breathing, rhythmic and slow, coming from somewhere close by. Too close. I spun the flashlight in a circle, checking all sides of the boat, but saw nothing. The breathing stopped. In its place came a new sound, something moving through the water just below the surface. I could see the ripples it created, moving in a circle around my boat, maybe 10 feet out. Whatever it was large. Larger than any gator I'd ever encountered. I drew my weapon and aimed at the ripples, tracking their movement. My finger rested on the trigger, every muscle in my body tensed. The ripples moved faster, tightening the circle, 5 feet out now, close enough that I could have hit it with a thrown rock. Then they stopped. The water went still. The breathing sound faded away, and I was alone again in the silence. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, heart pounding, weapon drawn, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The water remained still. The darkness remained complete except for my flashlight beam. The swamp had swallowed whatever had been circling my boat, pulled it back down into the depths where it belonged. I made the decision to retreat. Whatever had happened to Marcus, whatever had damaged his boat, I wasn't going to find answers out here in the dark. I needed daylight, backup, and proper equipment. I holstered my weapon, started the motor, and headed back toward the channel that would lead me out of Cypress Sink. The GPS showed the way clearly, but as I followed it, I noticed something strange. The route I'd taken to get here, the twisting channel through the cypress trees, didn't match the route the GPS was showing me now. It was close, but not identical. The turns were slightly different. The distances between landmarks didn't quite line up. It was as if the channel itself had shifted while I'd been in the sink. I told myself it was just GPS error, signal degradation from the swamp environment, my own adrenaline-fueled misremembering of the route in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the geography had changed, that the swamp had rearranged itself while I wasn't paying attention. The trip back to the launch took longer than the trip in. The channel seemed narrower, more restrictive. Twice I had to backtrack when the GPS indicated I'd gone the wrong way. The motor sputtered several times, coughing, and nearly dying before catching again. And all the while, I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed, of something keeping pace with me just beyond the reach of my flashlight. When I finally emerged from the channel and saw the lights of the boat launch ahead, The relief was almost overwhelming. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep purple. I'd been in the swamp for nearly 3 hours, though it felt like much longer. Backup had arrived while I was gone, 2 patrol units and an FBI vehicle. Special Agent Dalton Briggs was waiting for me at the launch, along with 2 local deputies. Briggs was a veteran agent, 20 years with the Bureau, and someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. "Rowan," he called out as I tied up the boat. "You look like hell. What happened out there?" I climbed out of the boat, my legs unsteady on solid ground. "Marcus is gone. I found his boat, damaged, no sign of him. Something's wrong out there, Briggs. Something that doesn't fit." I spent the next hour giving my report while the sun came up over the bayou. I told them everything: the damaged boat, the strange sounds, the light, the movement in the water. I could see the skepticism in some of their eyes, the way Briggs's expression tightened when I described the floating light and the breathing sounds. But he didn't interrupt, and he didn't dismiss anything I said. "The Marine unit is on its way," he said when I finished. "They'll do a full search of Cypress Sink and the surrounding area. We're also bringing in a dive team from New Orleans. If Marcus is in that water, we'll find him." But they didn't. The Marine unit searched for 3 days, covering every inch of Cypress Sink and the channels around it. The dive team went down as deep as they could safely go, probing the murky bottom with specialized equipment. They found nothing. No body, no additional evidence, no explanation for what had happened to Marcus Landry. They did find something else, though. When the dive team examined Marcus's boat more closely in daylight, they discovered traces of an organic compound in the damaged metal, something the initial analysis couldn't identify. It wasn't fish slime, wasn't plant matter, wasn't anything in the standard database. The lab kept the samples for further analysis, but no conclusive results ever came back. The official report listed Marcus Landry as missing, presumed dead, cause unknown. The investigation was kept open but moved to cold case status after 6 months. The drug trafficking operation we'd been investigating fell apart without Marcus's intelligence, and the people he'd been feeding us information about scattered to the wind. But that's not the end of the story. At least not for me. I went back to Cypress Sink 3 more times over the following weeks. Always in daylight, always with backup. I wanted to understand what I'd encountered that night, to find some rational explanation for the sounds, the light, the movement in the water. Each time the place seemed different, quieter, emptier, more like just another Louisiana swamp and less like the malevolent presence it had felt like in the darkness. The floating light never appeared again. Neither did the breathing sounds or the circling ripples. It was as if whatever had been there that night had retreated back into the deep places, content to remain hidden in the daylight world. But sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear it again. That wet, dragging sound from Marcus's last transmission. The sound of something moving through water. Something that doesn't belong. And I remember that circle of ripples around my boat, the way they tightened like a noose, the way they stopped just before reaching me. Whatever was in Cypress Sink that night, it let me go. It could have done to me what it did to Marcus, could have crushed my boat and pulled me down into that black water. But it didn't. Sometimes I wonder if it was mercy. Other times I think it was something else. A warning, maybe, or a message. Stay out of the deep places. Some investigations aren't meant to be concluded. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. I still have Marcus's phone in an evidence box in my office. The tech team was never able to recover any data from it. The water damage was too severe. But sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at it, remembering that night in the swamp, remembering the sound of that thing breathing in the darkness. and I wonder if Marcus is still out there somewhere, in the deep water of Cypress Sink, waiting for someone to find him. Or if he became something else, something that belongs to the swamp now, something that watches from the shadows when other agents come looking for answers in the darkness. I don't go into the bayous alone anymore, and I never go out at night. Some lessons you only need to learn once. The second incident happened exactly 2 months after Marcus Landry disappeared. By then, I'd almost convinced myself that what I'd experienced in Cypress Sink had been a combination of stress, darkness, and an overactive imagination. The human mind does strange things in isolation, creates patterns where none exist, sees threats in shadows. That's what I told myself every time I woke up from dreams of black water and circling ripples. Then the calls started coming in. The first one was from a local fisherman named Raymond Hebert, a man who'd spent his entire life navigating the bayous south of Baton Rouge. He'd been night fishing near Cypress Sink when his boat motor died. Not unusual. Outboard motors are temperamental machines, especially the older models. What was unusual was what he reported hearing while he sat in the darkness, waiting for dawn so he could paddle back to shore. It was like singing, he told me over the phone. His Cajun accent thick with something that might have been fear. But not any singing I ever heard before. It was coming from the water, from somewhere deep. And Agent Rowan, I've been fishing these waters for 50 years. I know every sound a swamp can make. This wasn't natural. I took down his statement, filed it with the others that had been accumulating in the Marcus Landry case file. There were 7 now, all from people who'd been in or near Cypress Sink after dark. All of them reported similar experiences. Strange sounds, lights in the water, the feeling of being watched. 2 of them mentioned seeing something large moving below the surface, too big to be a gator, too deliberate in its movements to be a sturgeon. Special Agent Briggs called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. He had the case file spread across his desk, along with topographical maps of the Bayou Sorrel area. His expression was troubled. "I've been looking at these reports," he said without preamble. 8 separate witnesses, all credible, all describing anomalous activity in the same general area. That's not coincidence, Rowan. I sat down across from him. "You think something really is out there?" "I think something happened to Marcus Landry, and I think whatever it was might happen again if we don't figure it out." He tapped one of the maps. "I want you to organize a proper investigation. Daylight operation, multiple boats, sonar equipment, maybe bring in some wildlife specialists from LSU. Let's approach this scientifically and see what we find." It took a week to organize everything. We assembled a team of 6, myself, 2 other federal agents, a marine biologist from Louisiana State University named Dr. Everett Price, and 2 local guides who knew the bayou system better than anyone. We had 3 boats, handheld sonar units, water sampling equipment, and enough communications gear to stay in constant contact with both each other and the command post we'd set up at the Pierre Part launch. We went in at 9 a.m. on a clear November morning. The weather was cooperating, temperature in the low 70s, no wind, excellent visibility, perfect conditions for what we were planning. The trip to Cypress Sink took about 45 minutes at cruising speed, following the same route I'd taken that night 2 months earlier. In daylight, with multiple boats and plenty of backup, the journey felt completely different. The cypress trees were still imposing, the channels still narrow and winding, but without the darkness and isolation, the swamp looked like what it was. A wild, beautiful ecosystem, home to countless species of birds, fish, and reptiles. Dr. Price was in my boat, setting up his equipment as we navigated the channels. He was a thin man in his 50s with the weathered skin of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He'd brought an array of instruments I didn't fully understand. hydrophones for listening to underwater sounds, pH meters for testing water chemistry, even a specialized camera system for capturing images in murky water. "Agent Rowan," he said as we approached Cypress Sink, "I've reviewed all the witness statements and I've been thinking about what might cause the phenomena they describe. The bioluminescent light, for instance. There are several species of dinoflagellates that produce light when agitated, though they're typically marine rather than freshwater organisms. But it's possible that—" "Doctor," I interrupted gently, "I appreciate the scientific perspective, but I was there that night. What I saw wasn't dinoflagellates, it was something else." He looked at me with patient skepticism. "I understand you had a traumatic experience, Agent, but in my experience, most unusual sightings have perfectly rational explanations once we gather sufficient data. That's why we're here, to collect that data." We emerged into Cypress Sink just before 10 a.m. In daylight, the place looked nothing like the malevolent void I remembered. The water was still dark, but you could see the brownish color was from tannins leached from the cypress roots, not from impossible depth. The trees around the perimeter were ancient and impressive, their gnarled trunks and hanging moss giving the area a cathedral-like atmosphere. It was beautiful in its own wild way. The other two boats joined us in the center of the sink. We formed a loose triangle, keeping about 30 yards between vessels. Agent Melissa Holt was in command of the second boat, with one of the local guides. Agent Wayne Mercer commanded the third boat with the other guide. Both agents were experienced field operators, people I'd worked with before and trusted completely. "Command, this is Rowan," I said into my radio. "All 3 teams are on site at Cypress Sink, beginning survey operation." "Copy that, Rowan," came Briggs's voice from the launch. "We have GPS on all 3 boats. Proceed with caution and maintain regular check-ins." Dr. Price deployed his first piece of equipment, the hydrophone. He lowered it into the water on a cable, watching a small screen that displayed the audio waveforms it was picking up. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The acoustic signature down there is quite complex. Lots of biological activity. Fish, invertebrates, possibly some mammals. Nothing unusual so far." I looked over at where Marcus's boat had been found, now long since towed away for evidence. The memory of that crushed aluminum hull was still vivid in my mind. "Doctor, how deep is this sink? The local fishermen say it's 30 feet or more in the center." Price consulted another instrument. "Sonar is reading interesting. The bottom is uneven. Looks like there's a depression in the center, possibly a sinkhole. The deepest point is measuring at 43 feet. Quite deep for a bayou system. 43 feet. Deep enough to hide a body. Deep enough to hide something larger than a body." Agent Holt's voice came through the radio. "Rowan, I'm getting some strange readings on my fish finder, showing a large mass at about 20 feet, maybe 50 yards to your northeast. Moving slowly." I turned my boat in that direction, Dr. Price still monitoring his equipment. "How large?" "Hard to say. The return is diffuse, not solid. Could be a school of fish, could be a large submerged log, could be... hell, I don't know what else it could be." As we motored toward the contact, Price's hydrophone suddenly came alive with sound. He adjusted the volume, and we could all hear it. A low-frequency rumble, almost subsonic, that seemed to be coming from somewhere deep below us. It rose and fell in a rhythmic pattern, not quite regular enough to be mechanical, but too regular to be random. "That's not any fish I've ever recorded," Price said, his earlier skepticism replaced by intense focus. "The frequency is too low, and the pattern is too complex. It's almost like vocalization, communication, maybe." The sound continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Price played it back. analyzing the waveform on his screen. If I didn't know better, I'd say this was whale song. But we're in a freshwater bayou in Louisiana, so that's impossible. I keyed my radio. All units, did everyone hear that sound through the hydrophones? Both other boats confirmed they had. Agent Mercer added, and not just through the hydrophones. We heard it through the hull of the boat, too. Whatever made that sound, it's big and it's close. We spent the next 2 hours systematically searching Cypress Sink, running sonar sweeps, taking water samples, deploying underwater cameras. Price filled notebooks with observations, growing increasingly puzzled by what we were finding. The water chemistry is unusual, he said, frowning at his pH meter. More acidic than it should be, and there are trace minerals I can't identify without laboratory analysis. The temperature is also strange. It's several degrees colder than the surrounding bayou water, which suggests an underground spring feeding this sink. That could explain the unusual depth. The underwater cameras captured murky footage of the bottom. Lots of fallen logs, some old tires and debris, the skeletal remains of several large fish. But nothing that would explain Marcus's disappearance or the reports from witnesses. At around noon, we broke for lunch, all 3 boats rafting together in the center of the sink. The local guides shared their thoughts about the area as we ate. "My pawpaw used to fish here when he was young," said one of them, a man named Jules Thibodeau. "He told me stories about this place. Said the old Chitimacha Indians wouldn't come here, called it a bad water. Said things went in and didn't come out." "Superstition," Dr. Price said dismissively. "Every isolated body of water has legends attached to it." "Maybe," Jules said, unbothered by Price's skepticism. "But my pawpaw was a practical man, Agent, not given to tall tales. And he told me he saw something here once when he was a boy. Something big in the water, bigger than any gator. Said it surfaced for just a moment, just long enough for him to see it wasn't any animal he recognized. Then it went back down and never came up again." I thought about the ripples that had circled my boat that night, the way they'd tightened around me like a predator assessing prey. Did he say what it looked like? He wouldn't talk about it in detail. But he never came back here after that day, and he warned me to stay away too. Of course, I didn't listen. Been guiding fishing trips out here for years, and I never seen nothing unusual. He paused. Until 2 months ago, night after that federal man disappeared. I was running a late trip, and we passed by here around 11 p.m. We all heard it, that singing sound, like what we heard today, but louder, clearer. Scared my clients so bad they insisted we head back immediately. I didn't argue with them. The afternoon passed without incident. We continued our surveys, documented everything we could, collected samples that Dr. Price promised to analyze thoroughly. By 3 p.m., we'd covered every section of Cypress Sink at least twice. We'd found nothing that would explain the anomalies, nothing that would account for Marcus's disappearance. "I think we should call it," Agent Holt said over the radio. "We've been thorough, and we're not finding anything actionable. Maybe whatever was here that night is gone now." I was about to agree when Dr. Price's equipment came alive again. The hydrophone was picking up that same low-frequency sound, but louder this time, closer. And there was something else, a higher-pitched sound layered over it, almost like clicks or snaps. "That's echolocation," Price said, excitement creeping into his voice. "Something down there is using sonar mapping its environment. But the signature is all wrong for any freshwater species I know. The frequency range is too broad, too sophisticated." The clicking sounds intensified, and I realized they were coming from multiple directions. Whatever was making them, there was more than one, and they were surrounding us. "All boats, stay close," I ordered, feeling that familiar tension returning to my chest. "Keep engines running and be ready to move." The clicking sounds continued for perhaps a minute, seeming to move around us in a coordinated pattern. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the normal background sounds of the swamp seemed to have ceased. No birds, no insects, no fish breaking the surface. That's when Agent Mercer's voice came through the radio, tight with tension. "Rowan, I've got visual contact with something. Northeast of my position, maybe 40 yards out. It just surfaced briefly, then went back under." "Can you describe it?" "Negative. It was only visible for a second, maybe less, but it was big, really big." I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the area Mercer had indicated. The water surface was disturbed, showing the ring pattern of something that had recently surfaced and submerged. But as I watched, the rings faded, and the surface went still again. Dr. Price was staring at his sonar screen, his face pale. "Agent Rowan, you need to see this. I'm picking up multiple large contacts, depths varying from 20 to 30 feet. They're in a formation around us, a deliberate formation." I looked at the screen. 5 distinct contacts, arranged in a loose circle around our 3 boats, each one reading as approximately 8 to 10 feet in length. As I watched, they began to move, maintaining their positions relative to each other, tightening the circle. "Command, this is Rowan," I said into the radio, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "We have multiple unknown contacts in the water around our position. Contacts are large and appear to be coordinating their movements, requesting permission to withdraw." Briggs's response came back immediately. "Approved. All units return to launch immediately, maintain formation, and proceed at best speed." We started our engines and began moving toward the channel that would lead us out of Cypress Sink. The contacts on the sonar followed us for about 100 yards, maintaining that circular formation. Then suddenly, they dove deeper and disappeared from the screens. The trip back to the launch was tense but uneventful. We maintained strict radio protocols, checking in every 5 minutes, reporting anything unusual. But the bayou seemed to have returned to normal. Birds calling in the trees, fish jumping, the normal sounds and movements of a Louisiana swamp. When we reached the launch, Briggs was waiting with the full debriefing team. We spent the next 3 hours going over every detail of what we'd observed, reviewing the sonar data, analyzing Dr. Price's recordings. The hydrophone sounds were particularly interesting. When Price slowed them down and filtered them through various audio processing software, they revealed a complex structure that suggested intentionality. "If I didn't know these were recorded in a Louisiana bayou," one of the audio technicians said, "I'd swear these were whale communications. The complexity, the patterning, the apparent meaning embedded in the variations, it's remarkably similar to humpback whale song." But whales don't live in Louisiana bayous. And even if one had somehow gotten trapped in the swamp system, it couldn't survive in the shallow, freshwater environment for long. Whatever we'd encountered in Cypress Sink wasn't a whale. Dr. Price spent weeks analyzing his samples and data. His final report was cautious but troubling. The water samples contained organic compounds he couldn't fully identify. The acoustic recordings suggested the presence of large, possibly intelligent aquatic life, and the sonar data indicated coordinated behavior that was highly unusual for any known freshwater species. But he stopped short of making any definitive claims about what we'd found. Without physical evidence, a specimen, clear video footage, something tangible, I can't make a conclusive identification, he wrote in his report. However, the data strongly suggests that Cypress Sink is home to an unknown species of large aquatic animal, possibly several individuals, displaying complex social behavior and sophisticated communication. Further investigation is warranted, preferably with more advanced equipment and a larger research team. That investigation never happened. 3 weeks after our expedition, The federal budget for the fiscal year was finalized, and there was no money allocated for mysterious aquatic creatures in Louisiana bayous. The Marcus Landry case remained open but inactive. The reports from witnesses continued to come in occasionally, but without the resources to investigate properly, they simply accumulated in the case file. I thought about requesting a transfer, putting Cypress Sink and everything associated with it behind me, but something kept me from doing it. Maybe it was a sense of unfinished business, or maybe it was something else. A need to understand what had really happened to Marcus, what had circled my boat that night in the darkness. About a month after the daylight investigation, I got a call from Raymond Habert, the fisherman who'd first reported hearing strange sounds near Cypress Sink. His voice was shaking. "Agent Rowan, you need to know something. Last night I was out on the bayou, nowhere near Cypress Sink. I've been avoiding that place like you told me. But I heard them sounds again, that singing, coming from a different part of the swamp, maybe 5 miles north of the sink. Whatever's in there, Agent, it's moving. It's not staying in one place." I took down the location and passed the information along to Briggs. He looked at the map, then at me, and I could see the same thought in his eyes that was forming in my mind. If there were multiple creatures and if they were mobile, then Cypress Sink wasn't a contained situation. It was potentially much larger, much more complicated than we'd imagined. But without physical evidence, without clear proof of what we were dealing with, there was nothing we could do except continue to monitor the situation and hope that no one else disappeared into the bayou's black water. I still go out to Cypress Sink sometimes, usually in daylight, always with backup. I tell myself I'm doing routine follow-up on the Marcus Landry case, but the truth is more complicated than that. I'm drawn to that place in a way I don't fully understand, as if some part of me needs to go back, needs to see it again, needs to remember. The locals have started calling it the drowning quiet, that absolute silence that descends when the strange sounds stop, when the normal life of the swamp seems to hold its breath. They say it's a warning, a sign that something is close, something is watching. I don't know if they're right, but I know that whatever Marcus Landry found in Cypress Sink that night, whatever crushed his boat and pulled him down into the deep water, it's still there, still waiting, still watching. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it's waiting for me specifically. If I'm meant to go back one more time, to finish what Marcus started, to find the answers that lie at the bottom of that 43-foot sinkhole in the heart of the Louisiana swamp. But I'm not ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some questions, once you've asked them, can never be unasked. Some investigations, once you've started them, can never be left unfinished. They stay with you, haunting the edges of your thoughts, pulling you back toward the darkness whether you want to go or not. Marcus Landry understood that, I think. In his last transmission, when he said something's not right out here, he wasn't just reporting an anomaly. He was acknowledging that he'd crossed a threshold, stepped into a world where the normal rules didn't apply, where the distinctions between hunter and prey, between observer and observed, had become dangerously blurred. I crossed that same threshold the night I went looking for him, and unlike Marcus, I made it back to shore. But something of me stayed behind in that black water, in that drowning quiet. I can feel its absence sometimes, like a missing tooth that your tongue keeps finding. The investigation continues, technically. The case file remains open. Evidence continues to accumulate, slowly, incrementally, building towards something we don't yet understand. And I remain assigned to it, tethered to Cypress Sink by invisible threads that grow stronger rather than weaker with the passage of time. Dr. Price called me last week. He'd been reviewing the acoustic recordings again, using new software, new analytical techniques. He'd found patterns he'd missed before, structures within structures, meanings nested inside meanings. Agent Rowan, he said, his voice strange over the phone. "I think these sounds aren't just communication. I think they're language. Real language with grammar and syntax and embedded information. And I think—" He paused, and I could hear him breathing, trying to decide whether to continue. "I think they were talking about us. The boats you by name. I asked him to send me his analysis. He promised he would, but the data never arrived. When I tried to call him back the next day, his number was disconnected. His university email bounced back as undeliverable. It was as if Dr. Everett Price had simply ceased to exist. I tried to follow up, to track him down, but got nowhere. His department at LSU said he'd taken an indefinite leave of absence. His home address led to an empty house. Furniture still in place, but no sign of recent occupancy. His colleagues claimed not to have heard from him in weeks. The last message in his university voicemail was time-stamped at 11:47 p.m., 3 days before I'd tried to call him. It was just background noise at first. Wind, maybe, or water moving. And then that sound, that wet breathing I'd heard in Cypress Sink, close enough to the microphone that it distorted the recording. Then Dr. Price's voice, barely a whisper. "I understand now. They've been here all along. We're the ones who don't belong." The message ended. There were no further communications. Special Agent Briggs told me to drop it, to focus on the Landry case and let university security handle the missing professor. But I knew there was a connection, knew that Price had found something in those recordings that had led him to some kind of revelation. A revelation that had cost him everything. I have the acoustic data on my personal drive now, encrypted and backed up in multiple locations. I've listened to it hundreds of times, trying to hear what Price heard, trying to understand the patterns he'd discovered. And sometimes, late at night with good headphones, I think I catch glimpses of it. Meanings that slide past just as I'm about to grasp them. Words in a language that predates human language, that exists in frequencies and rhythms we were never meant to decode. They were talking about us. By name. How is that possible? How could something living in a Louisiana bayou know my name, know who I am, unless they've been listening, watching, learning, for longer than we've been aware of them? Maybe for as long as humans have been navigating these waterways, maybe longer. The Chitimaca called it bad water, avoided it for reasons they never fully articulated. Maybe they knew. Maybe their ancestors had learned, over generations, that some places are meant to remain unexplored, some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. The drowning quiet continues. Reports still come in, more frequently now, from a wider area. The singing sounds have been heard as far north as Maringouin, as far south as Morgan City. Whatever lives in Cypress Sink, it's spreading or migrating, or there are more of them than we ever imagined. And still, the case remains open. Still, I return to those black waters, searching for answers I may never find, looking for Marcus Landry in the deep places where light doesn't reach. The swamp keeps its secrets, and some of those secrets, I'm beginning to believe, are meant to be kept. Winter came to the bayou, though winter in Louisiana meant temperatures in the 50s and occasional fog rather than snow. The fog was the worst part. It would roll in from the Gulf at night, thick and damp and impenetrable, turning the swamp into a maze where even the most experienced guides could lose their way. It was during one of these fog-laden nights in January that Agent Wayne Mercer disappeared. Mercer had been part of the daylight investigation at Cypress Sink, one of the agents who'd been in the boat when we'd picked up those coordinated contacts on sonar. Since then, he'd become as obsessed with the case as I was, spending his off hours reviewing the data, interviewing witnesses, trying to piece together a coherent picture of what we were dealing with. He'd also been going into the bayou alone. I didn't know about these solo excursions until after he vanished. Apparently, he'd been making regular trips to Cypress Sink and the surrounding waterways, usually in the early evening, always alone, carrying recording equipment and cameras. He'd been documenting sounds, trying to capture video footage, attempting to do what our official investigation couldn't, prove definitively that there was something unusual in those waters. His wife called me at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday. Wayne hadn't come home the night before, and his truck was missing from their driveway. His phone was going straight to voicemail. She'd tried to reach him through official channels, but no one had heard from him since he'd left the office at 4 p.m. the previous day. I knew immediately where he'd gone. By 7 a.m., I was at the Pierre Part launch with a search team. Mercer's truck was there, parked in the same spot where Marcus Landry's truck had been found 4 months earlier. His boat was gone. According to the launch attendant, Mercer had arrived around 5:30 p.m. just before dusk and headed south into the bayou. He hadn't returned. Special Agent Briggs pulled me aside before we launched our own boats. "Rowan, I need you to be straight with me. Has Mercer been going out there alone? Has he been conducting unauthorized investigations?" I couldn't lie to him. I don't know for certain, but it's possible. He's been as invested in this case as I am, maybe more so. Briggs's jaw tightened. God damn it. I specifically ordered everyone to stay out of that area without proper authorization and backup. If he's been freelancing... He shook his head. "Find him, Rowan. Bring him back. Whatever's going on in that swamp, we can't afford to lose another agent." The fog hadn't lifted yet, even though the sun was up. Visibility on the water was less than 30 feet, turning the bayou into a series of disconnected fragments, cypress trunks emerging from white void, channels that appeared and disappeared, sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We had 4 boats this time, 8 agents total, all equipped with GPS, radio, flares, and more firepower than was probably necessary for a search and rescue operation. But after what had happened to Marcus, no one was taking chances. The trip to Cypress Sink took twice as long as usual because of the fog. We had to navigate entirely by GPS, unable to see the normal landmarks that marked the route. The outboard motors sounded unnaturally loud in the muffled air, and every splash of water against the hull made me jump. My boat partner was Agent Melissa Holt, who'd also been part of the original daylight investigation. She was scanning the fog with a thermal imaging camera, hoping to pick up any heat signatures that might indicate Mercer or his boat. "Nothing yet," she said. "Just ambient temperature variations. The fog is making everything look like heat sources." We reached Cypress Sink around 9 a.m. The fog was even thicker there, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. The 4 boats formed up in a line and began a systematic sweep of the area, moving slowly, calling out Mercer's name every few minutes. There was no response except our own voices, strangely flat and echoless in the fog. After an hour of searching, we found Mercer's boat. It was drifting near the eastern edge of the sink, engine off, no sign of damage. When we pulled alongside, we found his equipment still aboard. Camera, audio recorder, GPS unit, even his weapon and badge. Everything except Mercer himself. The camera was still on, its memory card nearly full. The audio recorder showed that it had been running until approximately 11:45 p.m. the previous night, then had been manually shut off. His GPS unit showed his position history. He'd arrived at Cypress Sink at 6:17 p.m. and had remained in the area for the next 5.5 hours, moving in a low, systematic pattern that suggested he'd been searching for something. I pulled the memory card from the camera and inserted it into a ruggedized laptop we'd brought along. The footage showed Mercer setting up his equipment as daylight faded, positioning cameras and hydrophones in the water, settling in to wait and watch. The early footage was routine. Shots of the darkening water, the cypress trees, occasional fish breaking the surface. Mercer's voice provided occasional narration. 1840 hours, no activity. Water temperature is 54 degrees. Fog starting to roll in from the south. As darkness fell, the footage became less useful. The camera couldn't capture much in the low light, just occasional shapes and shadows. But the audio track was clear. We could hear Mercer breathing, the sound of water lapping against his boat, the distant calls of night birds. Then, at 10:23 p.m., according to the timestamp, we heard it. That same low-frequency sound we'd recorded during the daylight investigation, but closer, much closer. And Mercer's response, "There it is. Oh Jesus, there it is. I'm seeing movement in the water, approximately 15 yards northeast. Something large. Multiple somethings. They're surfacing." The camera swung around, but the night vision function wasn't on, so the footage showed only darkness with occasional reflections of moonlight on water. But the audio was crystal clear, splashing sounds, that wet breathing we'd heard before, and Mercer's voice tight with excitement or fear or both. "They're circling the boat. I count at least 5 separate contacts. They're looking at me. I can see their eyes reflecting my flashlight. God, they're huge." A long pause, filled only with the sounds of movement in water and Mercer's rapid breathing. Then, "I'm going to try to communicate. I'm going to play back the recordings from last month, see if they respond." We heard the hydrophone recording start to play. Those same whale-like sounds Dr. Price had captured, the ones he'd believed were language. The sounds echoed across the water, tinny and strange from the boat's speakers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the responses came, multiple sources, surrounding Mercer's boat. The sounds were different from the recorded ones, higher-pitched, more complex, as if in answer to what Mercer had played. And underneath them, we could hear Mercer's voice, barely a whisper. "They're answering. They're actually answering. This is incredible. This is..." The recording cut off abruptly. Not gradually, not with any sound of something going wrong, just stopped. As if Mercer had reached over and hit the off button. But Mercer's audio recorder had kept running for another 22 minutes. I pulled the recorder from its mount and played those final minutes through the laptop's speakers. All of us listened in silence, our boats drifting in the fog. For the first few minutes after the camera stopped, there was only silence. Then Mercer's voice, so quiet we had to turn the volume all the way up to hear him. "I understand now. Price was right. They've been trying to communicate with us. We just didn't. We couldn't comprehend the scale of what they were saying." A long pause, then, "They're showing me something. In the water. They want me to see. I'm going to look." The sound of Mercer moving in the boat, leaning over the side. Then a sharp intake of breath. Oh God, it's Marcus. They kept him. They preserved him somehow. He's down there, suspended in the water, and he looks like he's asleep. But he's not asleep. He's part of it now. Part of their, I don't know what to call it, their colony, their collective. Another pause, longer this time. When Mercer spoke again, his voice had changed. Calmer, almost peaceful. "They're asking if I want to join. Not in words, but I understand them. They're offering. They don't mean harm. They never meant harm. We're too loud, too disruptive. We don't listen. We never learn to listen." A sound like water sloshing against the boat hull. Then, "I'm going to go with them, just for a little while, just to see, just to understand. If anyone finds this recording, tell my wife I'm sorry. Tell her I had to know. Tell her..." The recording ended, manually shut off, just like the camera had been. We sat in our boats, surrounded by fog, listening to the echo of Mercer's last words. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Agent Holt broke the silence. He went in voluntarily. He chose to go with them. "We don't know that," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't true. We'd heard the recording. We'd heard Mercer's voice, heard the choice he was making. "Rowan," Briggs's voice crackled through the radio from the command post. "What did you find?" I keyed the transmit button, trying to figure out how to explain what we'd just heard. "We found Mercer's boat and equipment. We have audio recordings from last night. He made contact with something in the water. Multiple somethings, and I paused, knowing how insane this would sound. "He went with them, sir, by choice. He went into the water." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Then Briggs spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Repeat that last part, Agent." According to his own audio log, he made voluntary contact with the entities in the water and chose to enter the water with them. His exact words were, "I'm going to go with them." "Christ," Briggs muttered. Then louder, "All units, continue search. Focus on the water around Mercer's boat. If he's down there, we need to find him." We searched for the rest of the day and through the night, using every piece of equipment we had. Sonar, thermal imaging, even underwater drones equipped with lights and cameras. The drones descended into the murky water of Cypress Sink, their lights creating spheres of illumination in the darkness, revealing the debris-covered bottom 43 feet below. But we found nothing. No sign of Mercer, no sign of Marcus Landry, no sign of whatever creatures had been circling Mercer's boat the night before. The sink was empty, lifeless. Just another deep hole in a Louisiana bayou. Except we knew it wasn't empty. We'd heard the recordings. We'd seen the sonar contacts. We knew something was down there, something large and intelligent enough to communicate, to coordinate its movements, to understand human language and respond to it. Something that had taken Marcus Landry and kept him, preserved him in some way we didn't understand. And now it had taken Wayne Mercer, who had gone willingly into those black waters, seeking understanding. The official report listed Mercer as missing, presumed drowned. There was a memorial service, a flag ceremony, all the rituals we perform when an agent is killed in the line of duty. His wife received his pension and his posthumous commendation. The case file grew thicker with witness statements and evidence logs and photographs of an empty boat drifting in fog. But I knew the truth was more complicated than presumed drowned. Wayne Mercer hadn't drowned. He'd made a choice, crossed a threshold that I'd stepped back from, accepted an offer that I'd been too afraid to accept when those ripples had circled my boat in the darkness. Dr. Price had gone to them too. I was certain now. Whatever revelation he'd found in those acoustic recordings, it had led him to the same choice, the same threshold. And like Mercer, he'd chosen to cross it. The question that kept me awake at night was simple. Were they still alive down there somehow, suspended in the deep water like Mercer claimed Marcus was? Or had they died, and the creatures in Cypress Sink had simply kept their bodies, preserving them for reasons we couldn't fathom? I didn't have an answer, still don't. But I think about Mercer's words. They never meant harm. We're just too loud, too disruptive, we don't listen. What if he was right? What if everything we'd interpreted as threatening, the crushed boat, the circling movements, the strange sounds, was actually something else? Not aggression, but communication. Not hunting, but reaching out. Not threat, but offer. What if the creatures in Cypress Sink had been trying to make contact with us all along, and we'd been too afraid, too defensive, too human to understand? I went back to the sink one more time, 3 weeks after Mercer disappeared. I went alone, in darkness, breaking every protocol we'd established. I took his audio equipment and played those recordings again, the ones he'd played that night. The whale song sounds that Dr. Price had believed were language, I sat in my boat in the center of Cypress Sink, in the darkness, and I played those sounds across the water, and I waited. They came. I heard them before I saw them, that low-frequency rumble, rising from the depths. Then movement in the water around my boat, careful, deliberate, maintaining distance, not threatening, not aggressive, just present, aware. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the water. Eyes reflected back at me. Large, intelligent, utterly alien. Multiple pairs of eyes surrounding my boat in that familiar circle. "I'm listening," I said aloud, my voice sounding small and inadequate in the vast silence of the swamp. "I don't understand yet, but I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to understand what you want from us." The eyes watched me. The water moved around my boat, gentle swells that rocked the hull rhythmically. And then, from somewhere deep below, I heard it. A sound that might have been my name, pronounced in frequencies that human vocal cords could never produce, echoing up through 43 feet of water to reach me. They knew my name, just as they'd known Dr. Price's name, just as they'd known Wayne Mercer and Marcus Landry. They'd been paying attention, learning, trying to bridge a gap that was wider than species, wider than communication, something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, listening to them, trying to understand the patterns in their sounds. I didn't succeed. The meaning remained just beyond my grasp, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. But I felt something shift inside me, some barrier beginning to dissolve. When I finally started my motor and headed back to the launch, they followed me for a while, maintaining that respectful distance, those eyes watching from the darkness. Then, as I reached the channel that would lead me out of the sink, they fell back and let me go. I haven't gone back since, not because I'm afraid, but because I don't trust myself anymore. I understand now what happened to Mercer, to Price, maybe even to Marcus. I understand the temptation to cross that threshold, to go down into the deep water and become part of something larger, something older, something that exists outside the narrow boundaries of human experience. The offer is still open. I can feel it sometimes, late at night, like a thread connecting me to those black waters. All I have to do is return one more time and say yes. Say I'm ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to join them in whatever strange communion they maintain in the depths. But I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be, because unlike Mercer, unlike Price, I'm still too human, too attached to this world of air and sunlight, too afraid of what letting go might mean. The case file remains open. Reports still come in. The phenomena continue spreading to new areas, new waterways, and I remain assigned to it, tethered to something I can observe but never fully understand, investigating a mystery that might not want to be solved so much as accepted. The echo game continues. They call, and we respond, and neither side fully understands what the other is trying to say. But the conversation continues in frequencies below hearing and in patterns that dance at the edge of comprehension. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I hear my name again, pronounced in those impossible tones, rising up from some deep place within my own consciousness, inviting me, waiting for me. I know I'll go back eventually. It's not a question of if, but when. The connection is too strong now, the pull too insistent. They've marked me somehow, just as they marked Mercer and Price and Landry before me. And when I do go back, when I finally cross that threshold, I wonder if I'll have the strength to return. Or if I'll make the same choice they did, accepting the offer, descending into those black waters to join whatever strange collective dwells in the depths of Cypress Sink. The swamp keeps its secrets, but it also makes its offers, And sooner or later, everyone has to decide which is more important, keeping your secrets or accepting the truth, no matter how alien and terrifying it might be. I'm still deciding, but the clock is ticking, and the water is patient, and those eyes are always watching, always waiting, always ready to welcome one more searcher into the darkness. 6 months after Wayne Mercer disappeared, I requested reassignment. It was approved within a week, no questions asked, no resistance from administration. I think Special Agent Briggs was relieved to have me out of Louisiana, away from Cypress Sink and its accumulated mysteries. He never said it directly, but I could see it in his eyes during our final briefing. He thought I was too deep in it, too obsessed, too close to following Mercer over whatever edge he'd crossed. He was probably right. They sent me to the field office in Mobile, Alabama. Different state, different jurisdiction, different cases. I spent my days investigating financial fraud and organized crime, the kind of clean, understandable criminality that made sense, that followed rules, that could be solved with evidence and testimony and legal procedure. But at night, I dreamed of black water and eyes that glowed in darkness, and a voice speaking my name in frequencies that shouldn't exist. The dreams were always the same. I was in my boat in the center of Cypress Sink, and the water around me was full of movement. Shapes just below the surface, circling, watching, waiting. And then one of them would surface just for a moment, just long enough for me to see its face, except it wasn't a face, not in any sense I could articulate. It was something else, something my sleeping mind couldn't quite render properly, so it kept shifting, changing, showing me glimpses of what might have been features but weren't, not really. And yet I recognized it somehow, knew it, felt a connection to it that went deeper than visual recognition. And then I would wake up, gasping, covered in sweat, my hands gripping the sheets like they were the edges of a boat that was about to capsize. I tried to put it behind me, I really did. I focused on my new cases, made new friends in the mobile office, even started dating a woman named Jennifer who worked in the DEA field office across town. I went to therapy, talked about stress and trauma and the cost of working cases where people don't come back. The therapist gave me techniques for managing anxiety, prescriptions for better sleep, advice about maintaining boundaries between work and personal life. None of it helped, because the problem wasn't trauma or stress or failure to maintain boundaries. The problem was that part of me was still in Cypress Sink, had never left, was standing at the edge of that threshold that Mercer and Price and Landry had crossed. 3 months into my new assignment, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was only static at first, then a voice, distorted, barely comprehensible, like it was coming from very far away or very deep underwater. "Agent Rowan." My blood froze. I knew that voice, though it sounded wrong, altered somehow. "Mercer? Wayne, is that you?" More static, then, "Need you to understand. Not what you think. They're not. Wayne, where are you? Are you alive? Are you hurt? Come back, one more time. They want to show you something important. Please." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. I reported it to Briggs, who ran traces and came up empty. The call had originated from a burner phone purchased with cash in Baton Rouge, used once, then never activated again. But I knew it had been Mercer. I recognized his voice underneath the distortion, recognized the cadence of his speech, the way he paused between words. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. And he wanted me to come back. I should have ignored it, should have written it off as a hoax, or a hallucination, or my own obsession manifesting in external form. But I couldn't, because if there was even a chance that Mercer was alive, that he'd survived whatever had happened to him in those black waters, then I had to know. had to go back one more time. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Just took 3 days of personal leave, drove back to Louisiana, and found myself at the Pierre Part launch as the sun set on a warm April evening. The same launch where this had all started, where Marcus Landry's truck had been found, where Mercer's truck had been found, where my own journey into this mystery had begun. I rented a boat, loaded it with equipment, and headed south into the bayou as twilight deepened into night. I knew the way by heart now, every turn, every landmark, every twist in the channels that led to Cypress Sink. The journey that had taken me hours in darkness 6 months ago now took less than 45 minutes, even in low light. Cypress Sink looked exactly as I remembered it. The same ancient cypress trees forming that circular cathedral around the deep pool. The same black water reflecting nothing. The same sense of vast depth, of something enormous lurking just beyond sight. I cut the motor and let the boat drift into the center of the sink. Then I did exactly what Mercer had done on his last night. I set up cameras and audio recording equipment. I positioned hydrophones in the water. And then I played back those recorded sounds, the ones Dr. Price had believed were language, the ones that had prompted responses when Mercer had played them. The sounds echoed across the water, strange and otherworldly in the darkness. And I waited. They came quickly this time, as if they'd been expecting me. I heard them first, that low-frequency rumble rising from the depths, and then saw movement in the water around my boat. The same circular formation, the same careful coordination, the same sense of intelligent observation. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the water. Multiple pairs of eyes reflected back at me from the darkness. But this time, instead of maintaining distance, one of them came closer. Close enough that I could see more than just eyes. It surfaced about 10 feet from my boat, and my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It was large, maybe 12 feet long, with a smooth, dark skin that looked almost reptilian but moved with a fluidity that was more mammalian. The head was elongated, streamlined, with those enormous eyes positioned forward like a predator's. But the intelligence in those eyes was impossible to ignore. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was something thinking, choosing, communicating. And then it spoke, not in words. It had no vocal apparatus that I could see that would produce human speech, but in images somehow projected directly into my mind. I saw Marcus Landry, not as I'd known him but as he was now, suspended in the deep water, his body changed, transformed into something that could survive in those depths. He wasn't dead. He was different. Still conscious, still aware, but no longer entirely human. I saw Wayne Mercer, too, similarly transformed, similarly suspended in the depths. And Dr. Everett Price, who had come to them not from the bayou but from some other waterway, following the same trail of evidence and mystery that had consumed us all. They weren't prisoners. They weren't victims. They were something else. Volunteers, converts, translators between two forms of consciousness that had evolved in parallel on this planet but had never successfully communicated until now. The creature showed me more. Images of ancient times, of waterways before humans had names for them, of a species that had lived in the deep places for millions of years, hidden, patient, occasionally glimpsed but never fully seen. They had watched us evolve, had observed our cities and our boats and our gradual domination of every ecosystem. They had tried to communicate with us before, in previous centuries, but we had lacked the technology or the framework to understand them. Until now. Until sonar and hydrophones and audio recording equipment had given us the tools to hear their language, to detect their presence, to begin to comprehend that we were not alone in these waters. The images shifted, showing me what they wanted. Not to harm us, not to replace us, but to connect with us, to share the waters of this planet in understanding rather than ignorance, to build bridges between the world above the surface and the world below. But they needed translators. Humans who could survive in their environment, who could carry human consciousness into the depths and help them understand how to communicate with us effectively. That's what Marcus and Wayne and Price had become. Bridges between worlds, translators between species. And they wanted me to join them. I felt the offer like a physical thing, a choice that stood before me as clearly as if it had been written in the air. I could say yes. I could slip into that black water and let them transform me into whatever Marcus and the others had become. I could be part of something larger, something older, something that existed in spaces human consciousness rarely touched. Or I could say no. I could go back to Mobile, back to my clean cases and my normal life. Back to pretending that none of this had ever happened. I could walk away from the mystery, leave it unsolved, except that some questions don't have answers. Or at least, don't have answers that humans can reach without ceasing to be human. I looked into those enormous eyes and I understood what Mercer had understood, what Price had understood. They weren't monsters. They weren't threats. They were just other, different. A parallel evolution of intelligence that had taken a different path, developed in a different medium, reached consciousness through a different route. And they were offering me a chance to understand them from the inside, to become part of their world, to experience consciousness in a form I couldn't imagine from this side of the threshold. I wanted to say yes. God help me, I wanted to. The temptation was enormous, overwhelming, a pull so strong it made my hand shake and my breath catch. To finally understand, to finally know, to cross that last barrier between mystery and revelation. But I thought about Jennifer waiting for me in Mobile, about my family, who didn't know where I was or what I was doing. About all the people who depended on me, who needed me to stay human, to stay tethered to this world of air and sunlight. I thought about the cases I still had to solve, the criminals I still had to catch, the people I still had to protect, about the life I'd built, the person I'd become, the commitments I'd made to a world that existed above the waterline. And I thought about what I would lose if I said yes. Not just my human form, but my human connections, my human understanding, my human existence. I would become something else, something that could never come back, never return to the life I'd known. The choice was mine. The creature in the water made that clear. They wouldn't take me by force, wouldn't trick me or coerce me. The offer was genuine and the decision was mine alone. I looked into those eyes one more time. Then I spoke, my voice shaking but clear. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't. Not now. Maybe not ever. I'm not ready to stop being human. The creature sank back into the water without any sign of disappointment or anger. Just acceptance. And then, one by one, the others sank as well, disappearing into those black depths, taking their offer with them. I sat in my boat for a long time after they were gone, feeling the weight of what I'd refused, the magnitude of the choice I'd made. Part of me screamed that I'd made the wrong decision, that I'd turned away from the greatest mystery I would ever encounter, that I'd chosen comfort over understanding. But another part of me felt relief. I was still human, still myself, still tethered to this world and all its mundane complications. I started my motor and headed back to the launch as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The journey out felt different than the journey in, lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. Or maybe it felt heavier, knowing what I'd left behind in those black waters. I never told anyone about that night. Not Briggs, not the therapist, not Jennifer. I wrote up a brief report about following a lead on the Mercer case. Found nothing. Case remains unsolved. They filed it away with all the other reports, all the other unanswered questions, all the other mysteries that accumulate in bureau basements and forgotten storage facilities. But I think about it every day. Wonder if I made the right choice. Wonder what Marcus and Wayne and Price are experiencing right now, down in the depths of Cypress Sink, existing in a form I can't comprehend, understanding things I'll never know. The dreams stopped after that night, or rather, they changed. Now, instead of drowning, instead of being pulled under, I dream of standing at the water's edge, watching shapes move in the depths, knowing they're still there, still waiting, still offering. The offer remains open. They made that clear. Anytime I want to return, anytime I'm ready to cross that threshold, they'll be waiting. The door isn't closed, just deferred. I'm 46 years old now. I have maybe 20 good years left in the bureau, then retirement, then whatever comes after. And I know that someday, when I'm old and my human connections have frayed and the prospect of continuing this human existence has lost its appeal, I'll probably go back one more time. I'll go back to Cypress Sink, and I'll say yes to the offer I refused. I'll slip into those black waters and let them transform me into whatever Marcus and the others became. I'll finally cross that threshold and understand the mystery that's haunted me for all these years. But not yet. Not today. Today I'm still human, still bound to this world of air and sunlight, still committed to the life I've chosen above the waterline. The case file remains open. It always will. Because some cases aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be lived with, carried forward, returned to when the time is right. Marcus Landry is still listed as missing, presumed dead. So is Wayne Mercer. So is Dr. Everett Price. The official record will never change, because the truth is too strange, too impossible, too far outside the boundaries of what official records can accommodate. But they're not dead. They're just elsewhere, transformed, existing in a state that has no name in human language, experiencing consciousness in a form that human consciousness can barely touch. And they're waiting, not for rescue. They don't need rescue. But for understanding, for connection, for more translators to bridge the gap between their world and ours. I won't be the last person to receive their offer. Others will come to Cypress Sink, drawn by the mystery, compelled by the same obsession that compelled me. And some of them will say yes where I said no. Some of them will cross that threshold and never come back. And that's okay, because the offer is real and the choice is genuine. And sometimes the right answer is yes, even when it costs you everything you are. I just wasn't ready. Not then, maybe not ever. But the water is patient. The depths are eternal. And the offer remains open, a standing invitation to anyone brave enough or desperate enough or curious enough to accept it. I drive past the Pierre Part launch sometimes, on my way to other cases, other mysteries, other investigations that have cleaner endings. I look out at the bayou, at those dark channels winding south into the cypress swamps, and I think about what lies at the end of those waterways, what waits in the depths of Cypress Sink, patient and ancient and utterly alien. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear my name spoken in those impossible frequencies, rising up from some deep place that exists both within me and beyond me, reminding me that the connection is still there, that I'm still marked, that the offer still stands. I'm still deciding, still standing at the water's edge, 1 foot in the human world and 1 foot pointing towards something else, still trying to figure out which world I truly belong to. The swamp keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its promises, and when I'm finally ready to accept what it's offering, it will be there, waiting, ready to welcome me home to depths I've never known but somehow always belonged to. Until then, I carry the mystery with me. Every day, every case, every moment of human existence. I carry the knowledge that there are other forms of consciousness sharing this planet with us, other ways of being that exist just beyond the surface of our awareness. And I carry the weight of my choice, the yes I didn't say, the threshold I didn't cross, the transformation I deferred to some unknown future date. Maybe that's enough. Maybe just knowing is enough, without needing to cross over. Maybe I can serve as a different kind of translator, one who stays human, who carries the knowledge back into the human world, who stands at the boundary and refuses to let either side forget that the other exists. Or maybe I'm just afraid. Maybe I made the wrong choice, and I'll spend the rest of my human life regretting it, wondering what I would have become if I'd been brave enough to say yes. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But the water is patient, and the depths are eternal. And somewhere in the black waters of Cypress Sink, Marcus Landry and Wayne Mercer and Dr. Everett Price are waiting, transformed into something I can't quite imagine, experiencing consciousness in forms I'll never fully understand unless I join them. The case remains open, the mystery endures, and I remain tethered to both worlds, too human to leave, too changed to ever fully return to who I was before that first night in the swamp when I heard Marcus's last transmission and followed his signal into the darkness. Some investigations change you. Some mysteries mark you in ways that never wash off. Some cases become part of who you are, woven into your identity so thoroughly that you can't separate the investigator from the investigation, can't distinguish between the mystery you're solving and the person you're becoming. The Cypress track case did that to me. It took Agent Jack Rowan, federal investigator, and turned him into something else, something in between, something that exists at the boundary between the known world and the deep places, between human consciousness and whatever lies beyond. And maybe that's the real answer. Maybe I don't have to choose. Maybe I can remain at this threshold, serving as a bridge, a translator, a reminder that the boundaries between worlds are more permeable than we like to believe. Or maybe I'm just delaying the inevitable. Maybe someday the pull will become too strong, the offer too compelling, and I'll find myself back at the Pierre Part launch at twilight, loading a boat with equipment I'll never use again, heading south into the bayou one final time. When that day comes, I hope I'll be ready. I hope I'll have said my goodbyes, tied up my loose ends, made my peace with the human existence I'm leaving behind. I hope I'll go into those black waters with open eyes and clear understanding, accepting the transformation for what it is, not death, not surrender, but evolution into something new. But until that day comes, I remain here, human, flawed, haunted, but human nonetheless, carrying the weight of what I know and what I've refused, standing guard at the boundary between worlds, making sure that both sides remember the other exists. The water calls, the depths whisper, the offer stands. But today, I choose air and sunlight, and the complicated, messy, beautiful human world. Tomorrow might be different, but today, this is enough. The case remains open, forever open, because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be lived. And I'm still living mine, one day at a time, one choice at a time, standing at the water's edge with my feet on solid ground and my eyes on the depths, forever balanced between two worlds, forever changed by what I've seen, forever marked by the mystery I didn't solve but learned to carry. That's the real ending to the Cypress track case. Not closure, not answers, not resolution, just continuation. Just the ongoing, eternal question of what lies beneath the surface, what waits in the deep places, what offers are extended from consciousnesses so different from our own that we can barely comprehend them, and the knowledge that someday, when the time is right, I'll finally have my answer. Not because I've solved the mystery, but because I've become part of it. Until then, I wait and watch and listen to the water, which never stops calling my name in frequencies I almost understand, in languages I almost speak, in voices that promise transformation and understanding, and a kind of truth that exists beyond human comprehension. The swamp keeps its secrets, and I keep mine. And somewhere in the darkness between us, Marcus and Wayne and Price wait patiently, existing in forms I can't imagine, experiencing consciousness in ways I can only dream about. One day, I'll join them. But not today. Today, I remain human. And that's enough. It has to be. I'm 63 years old now. I retired from the FBI 7 years ago with full pension and a commendation for 28 years of service. I married Jennifer, divorced her 3 years later, remained friends. I have no children, no close family ties, nothing tying me particularly strongly to this human existence, except habit and inertia. I live alone in a small house near the coast in Alabama, close enough to the water that I can hear it at night, far enough away that I don't have to see it every day. I volunteer at a local community center, play chess with other retirees, maintain a garden that produces more tomatoes than I can eat. It's a good life, a simple life, a human life. But I still dream of Cypress Sink, still hear my name spoken in those impossible frequencies, still feel that connection, as strong now as it was 17 years ago when I first entered those black waters looking for Marcus Landry. The case was officially closed 12 years ago. Cold case protocols required it after a decade of no new leads. Marcus Landry, Wayne Mercer, and Dr. Everett Price were all declared legally dead. Their families held memorial services. The FBI moved on to other mysteries. But I know the truth, and I carry it with me every day. Last week, I got a phone call. Unknown number, no caller ID. When I answered, there was that familiar static, that sense of great distance or great depth. Then a voice, Wayne Mercer's voice, still altered but recognizable. "Jack," he said. And hearing my first name from someone who only ever called me Rowan made me catch my breath. It's time. If you're ready, if you still want to understand, come back. One last time, we're waiting. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone for a long time, feeling that old pull, that old temptation, that old promise of transformation and understanding. I'm 63 years old. My human connections have frayed. My purpose in this world has dimmed. And I'm tired, not of living, but of standing at the threshold, of remaining between worlds, of carrying a mystery I've never fully resolved. Maybe it's time. Maybe the moment has finally come. Maybe I'm ready to cross that threshold I've stood at for 17 years, ready to accept the offer I've refused for so long. I've been making arrangements, putting my affairs in order, writing letters to the few people who might care where I've gone, planning one final trip to Louisiana, to the Pierre Part launch, to Cypress Sink. When I go, I won't be taking cameras or recording equipment, won't be conducting an investigation or gathering evidence. I'll just be accepting an invitation, finally saying yes to a question that's been hanging in the air since that first night when I heard Marcus's last transmission and followed him into the darkness. I don't know what I'll become. Don't know what consciousness looks like in those depths, what existence feels like when you're no longer bound by human form and human limitations. But I'm ready to find out, ready to finally understand the mystery that's defined half my life. The water is still calling my name. After all these years, after all this time, the offer still stands, and I'm finally ready to accept it. Next Tuesday, if the weather holds, I'll drive to Pierre Part. I'll rent a boat, though I probably won't need it. I suspect they'll meet me at the water's edge. And I'll slip into those black waters one final time. Not as an investigator, but as a volunteer. Not as a seeker of truth, but as someone ready to become part of the truth itself. I'm not afraid. That's the strangest thing. After 17 years of fear and hesitation and standing at the threshold, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm just ready. Maybe that's what they've been waiting for all along. Not for me to be brave, but for me to be ready. Not for me to solve the mystery, but for me to become part of it. The Cypress track case will finally be closed, not because we've solved it, but because the last person who truly understood it will have crossed over into the answer, will have become part of what we were investigating all along. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some mysteries can only be resolved by becoming them. Maybe some questions can only be answered by transforming into the answer. I'll find out soon enough. The water is patient. The depths are eternal. And I'm finally ready to go home to a place I've never been, but somehow always belonged to. See you in the deep places. The first time I heard about Parish Road 447, it was already too late for the 2 technicians who'd gone missing there. I'm Agent Kyle Holt, and I've been with the FBI's Evidence Response Team for 11 years. My job is technical, documenting crime scenes, collecting evidence, processing data. I'm not an investigator in the traditional sense. I don't interview witnesses or chase suspects. I chase details, patterns, traces that others miss. I make sense of chaos through measurement and documentation, which is why they called me when the GPS data from the missing technicians stopped making sense. It was late October, and I'd been assigned to assist a federal investigation into illegal waste dumping in the wetlands south of Houma, Louisiana. The operation was routine. Track the trucks, document the dump sites, build a case against the company responsible. We had 2 evidence technicians, Sarah Dalton and Marcus Flynn, who'd been sent ahead to survey a suspected dump site accessed via an old petroleum service road. They'd checked in at 14:30 hours, confirmed they'd located the road, were proceeding to the site. Expected return time, 1700 hours. Standard protocol. They never came back. When they missed their check-in at 17:15, the operations coordinator tried to raise them on radio. No response. Tried their cell phones. Straight to voicemail, both of them. By 18 o'clock, we'd escalated to a missing persons situation, and by 19 o'clock, I was in a vehicle with Special Agent Nathan Briggs, heading south on Highway 90 toward their last known position. The GPS logs from their vehicle told a strange story. They'd followed Parish Road 447 exactly as planned, a narrow access road that had been built in the 1970s to service an oil drilling operation. The operation had shut down in 1989, and the road had been officially decommissioned in 1992, removed from most maps, left to be reclaimed by the swamp. But the road was still there, barely, and it was still being used. That's what the investigation was about. Someone was using these forgotten roads to dump industrial waste where no one would look. According to the GPS logs, Dalton and Flynn's vehicle had proceeded along Parish Road 447 for approximately 3.7 miles, then stopped. The vehicle had remained stationary for 42 minutes. Then the GPS signal had simply ended. Not gradually degraded, not lost to interference. Just stopped, as if the device had been powered off or destroyed. "What's at the 3.7-mile mark?" I asked Briggs, as we drove through the gathering darkness. He consulted his tablet. According to the old petroleum company maps, there was a pumping station there, decommissioned like everything else, should be nothing but ruins by now. And our people were supposed to photograph it. Right. Document any signs of recent activity, collect soil samples, standard evidence gathering, 2-hour job, maximum. Briggs looked out at the darkening sky. They've been gone for 4.5 hours. We reached the turnoff for Parish Road 447 just after 1930. The entrance was barely visible, a gap in the vegetation where a chain-link gate hung open on rusted hinges. No street sign, no markers, nothing to indicate this had ever been a road at all. Briggs turned on the vehicle's high beams and nosed through the gate. Immediately, the pavement, what little remained of it, deteriorated into broken asphalt and exposed dirt. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for our SUV, with dense vegetation pressing in from both sides. Cypress trees loomed overhead, their branches tangled with Spanish moss that hung like gray curtains in our headlights. "This road isn't on the current GPS," I said, checking my tablet. "The satellite view shows vegetation. It's like it doesn't exist." "But it does exist," Briggs said grimly, steering around a particularly deep pothole. "And Dalton and Flynn drove down it this afternoon." The road twisted through the swamp, following a route that made no logical sense, curving where it should have been straight, zigzagging around nothing visible. I checked our GPS position constantly, watching our blue dot move along a route that the map insisted wasn't there. After about 2 miles, Briggs stopped the vehicle. "You see that?" I leaned forward, peering through the windshield. In the headlight beams, I could see tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones, cutting through the standing water that covered portions of the road. "Those could be from their vehicle," I said. Briggs got out and I followed him. The night air was thick and warm, filled with the sounds of insects and frogs and the distant splash of something moving through water. I pulled out my flashlight and examined the tire tracks more closely. "SUV tires," I confirmed. "Same tread pattern as the vehicle Dalton and Flynn were driving. These tracks are recent, made within the last 6 to 8 hours, judging by the water seepage." But there was something else. Another set of tracks, parallel to the first but slightly offset. Same tread pattern, same depth, as if the vehicle had passed by twice, once going in, once coming out. Except Dalton and Flynn's vehicle had never come out. "Could be another vehicle," Briggs suggested. "Same model." "Or the GPS logs are wrong," I said, though I didn't believe it even as I spoke. GPS doesn't lie about basic movement. If their vehicle had returned along this road, the logs would show it. We got back in the SUV and continued. The road deteriorated further as we progressed. More water, deeper ruts, vegetation encroaching to the point where branches scraped against the sides of our vehicle. I kept checking the odometer. 2.8 miles from the highway, 3.2 miles, 3.5 miles. At 3.7 miles, we found their vehicle. It was parked on a slightly elevated section of road, positioned exactly where the GPS logs said it had stopped. The doors were closed, the windows up, everything appearing normal from a distance. But as our headlights illuminated it, I could see that something was wrong. The vehicle was facing the wrong direction. When Dalton and Flynn had driven in, they'd been traveling away from the highway, heading deeper into the swamp. But their vehicle was now facing back toward the highway, as if they'd turned around to leave. Yet the GPS had never recorded any such movement. Briggs parked behind their vehicle, and we both got out. I approached cautiously, my hand near my weapon, even though I saw no immediate threat. The vehicle was empty. No sign of Dalton or Flynn. No sign of any struggle. I tried the driver's door. Unlocked, I opened it and leaned in, checking the interior with my flashlight. The keys were still in the ignition. Both technicians' personal effects, phones, wallets, badges, were still in the vehicle. Their equipment cases were in the back, unopened. They left everything, I said. Why would they leave everything? Briggs was examining the ground around the vehicle. Footprints here. Looks like they both got out on the driver's side. Tracks lead that way. He pointed into the swamp, away from the road. I joined him, studying the prints. 2 sets, both wearing the standard issue boots that evidence technicians used. The tracks were clear in the soft mud, heading directly away from the road into increasingly dense vegetation. They walked into the swamp? I said. That makes no sense. They were here to document the pumping station, not to go hiking through the marsh. Maybe they saw something, or heard something. I pulled out the site map on my tablet, trying to orient our position. The old pumping station should be northeast of here, about 200 yards, but these tracks are heading southwest, away from their objective, Briggs noted, and away from the road. Whatever made them leave the vehicle, it wasn't their assignment. We followed the tracks. They were easy to follow at first. Clear boot prints in mud, broken vegetation, disturbed ground. But after about 50 yards, they became harder to read. The ground got wetter, covered with standing water, and the tracks began to fill in almost as quickly as they'd been made. Then, abruptly, the tracks stopped, or rather, they became confused. The ground was churned up, as if both technicians had been moving in circles or pacing, or I couldn't determine what, and then the clear tracks just ended. No continuation, no indication of which direction they'd gone from this point. This doesn't make sense, I said, crouching down to examine the disturbed ground more closely. It's like they just stopped walking, or were picked up. Briggs scanned the surrounding darkness with his flashlight. Or they went into the water. There's a channel right here. He pointed to a narrow waterway I hadn't noticed, maybe 6 feet wide, dark and still. Without their equipment, without even taking their phones? I shook my head. Evidence technicians don't operate like that. They're trained to maintain contact, to follow protocols. Dalton has 14 years of experience. Flynn has 8. They wouldn't just wander off into a swamp and lose track of their position. Then, what happened to them? I didn't have an answer. I stood up, playing my flashlight across the area, trying to see anything that would explain the scene before us. The beam caught something on the far side of the small channel, a reflection, brief and bright. There, I said, something metal. We found a narrow spot where we could jump across the channel without getting soaked. On the other side, I located what my light had caught. A piece of equipment, one of our standard evidence markers, the kind we use to flag items at a crime scene. It was planted in the mud, marking nothing visible. Why would they place a marker here? Briggs asked. I examined the ground around the marker carefully, nothing obvious, just mud and water and vegetation. But when I looked closer, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were more boot prints here, but they weren't like the ones we'd been following. These prints were wrong. The tread pattern matched, same boots, same people, but the impressions were off, too deep in some places, too shallow in others. And the spacing was irregular, as if the people making them had been moving strangely, or as if the tracks had been made, then the ground had shifted, then more tracks had been made over the same spot. Briggs, I said quietly, we need to call for backup, full search and rescue, full technical team. This scene is wrong. He didn't argue. He pulled out his radio and tried to contact the operations coordinator. Nothing but static. He tried his cell phone. No signal. We're less than 4 miles from the highway, he said. We should have cell coverage here. I checked my own phone. Same result. No signal, not even 1 bar. The GPS on my tablet was still working. still showing our position on the blank space where Parish Road 447 wasn't supposed to exist. "Let's get back to the vehicle," Briggs said. "We'll drive back to the highway and call from there." I nodded, but as we turned to retrace our steps, something caught my attention. A sound, distant but distinct, a low humming, almost mechanical, coming from somewhere deeper in the swamp. It rose and fell in pitch, regular but not quite rhythmic, like an engine running badly or a generator struggling under load. "You hear that?" I asked. Briggs stopped, listening. "Yeah, could be the old pumping station. Maybe there's equipment still running. After 35 years, that's not possible. Maybe someone's using it. Squatters, or whoever's been dumping waste out here." We stood there for a moment, listening to that strange humming sound. It seemed to be coming from the northeast, the direction where the pumping station was supposed to be, according to the old maps. The direction Dalton and Flynn should have gone, but apparently hadn't. "We should check it out," Briggs said. Every instinct I had screamed against that idea. "We should get back up first. We have 2 missing technicians, unexplained tracks, no communications. Standard protocol says we withdraw and return with support. Standard protocol also says we investigate. We're already here. The station is only 200 yards away. 5 minutes to check it out, then we leave." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right in one sense. We were already here, already committed. And if there was any chance Dalton and Flynn were at that pumping station, we needed to know. 5 minutes, I agreed. Then we're out of here, backup or no backup. We made our way northeast using the compass on my tablet to navigate through the dense vegetation. The humming sound grew louder as we approached, and with it came a smell. Something chemical, sharp, like diesel fuel mixed with something else I couldn't identify. The old pumping station emerged from the darkness like a relic from another era. It was larger than I'd expected. A cluster of rusted metal structures surrounding a concrete pad with pipes and valves and equipment that had been abandoned decades ago. Everything was covered in vegetation, Spanish moss draping the metal framework, vines growing through gaps in the concrete. But something was wrong. The facility looked abandoned, as it should be after 35 years of neglect, but it also looked maintained. The concrete pad was clear of debris, as if it had been swept recently. Some of the pipes showed signs of recent use, clean metal where rust should have been, fresh oil stains on the ground, and that humming sound was definitely coming from here, from somewhere inside the tangle of equipment and structures. "Someone's been using this place," Briggs said, his hand moving to his weapon. "Recently." I pulled out my camera and started documenting what we were seeing. The cleared areas, the clean pipes, the oil stains. Evidence of ongoing activity at a facility that was supposed to be dead and forgotten. That's when I saw the light. A faint glow, coming from inside what looked like a control building at the center of the facility. Not bright, just a pale illumination visible through a grimy window, steady and cold. "Briggs," I whispered, pointing. He saw it too. We approached the building carefully, weapons drawn now, professional caution overriding curiosity. The humming sound was louder here, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. The door to the control building was open, hanging slightly askew on its hinges. Briggs went in first, flashlight and weapon moving in sync as he swept the interior. I followed, my own light adding to his. The room was small, maybe 15 feet square, filled with ancient control equipment. Gauges and switches, and panels covered in decades of dust. But in the center of the room, incongruous and impossible, was a modern LED lantern, the kind we used in evidence collection, sitting on an old desk. It was turned on, casting that pale, steady light we'd seen through the window. "That's our equipment," I said. recognizing the bureau markings on the lantern's base. Dalton and Flynn were here. Briggs examined the rest of the room while I documented the lantern's position. There were footprints in the dust, recent ones, multiple sets, moving around the room in what seemed like random patterns. On the desk next to the lantern was a notebook, the kind we used for field notes. I picked it up carefully, holding it by the edges. The notebook belonged to Sarah Dalton. Her name was written on the cover in her neat handwriting. I opened it, flipping through pages of technical notes and observations from various cases. The last entry was dated today, time-stamped 15:47 hours, about 90 minutes after they'd arrived at this location. The handwriting was still neat at first, then became increasingly erratic. Pumping station appears to have been recently active. Fresh oil residue, cleared areas, equipment that shows signs of use. No obvious waste dump site visible. Recommend expanded search radius. Strange sound coming from deeper in the facility. Mechanical, but irregular. Investigating source. Found access hatch to underground tanks. Marcus is checking it out. Something not right about this place. The road we took, I'm looking at my GPS track and it doesn't match my memory of the drive. Like, we took a different route but the GPS says we didn't. Marcus says the tank is empty, but there's something down there. I can hear it too. Like breathing. Like something large breathing. The handwriting was barely legible by this point. Letters slanting wildly across the page. We need to leave. Something is wrong with this place. The road, when I look at where we parked, I can see the vehicle, but it's facing the wrong direction. I don't remember turning it around. Marcus doesn't either. How did it turn around? The humming is getting louder. It's not mechanical. It's organic. It's alive. The final entry was just 3 words, written in letters so pressed into the paper they nearly tore through. We are leaving. And yet, they hadn't left. Their vehicle was still parked where they'd stopped it. Keys in the ignition. All their equipment still inside. They'd walked into the swamp in the wrong direction, left their marker in the mud, and then simply vanished. "Halt," Briggs said quietly. "You need to see this." I looked up from the notebook. Briggs was standing by a door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a panel of old control equipment. The door was open, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. "The tank access," I said. Briggs nodded. "And there's light down there. Faint, but definitely light." Every fiber of my being screamed not to go down those stairs. Whatever had frightened, 2 experienced evidence technicians enough to make them abandon their equipment and wander into a swamp, it was down there. And whatever Dalton had heard breathing in that tank, it might still be down there too. But I'm an evidence technician. I go where the evidence leads, even when it leads into darkness. 5 minutes, I said. We take a quick look, document what we see, then we get out of here and call for a full team. Agreed, Briggs said, though I could hear the tension in his voice. We descended the stairs, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air grew cooler as we went down, and damper, thick with that chemical smell I'd noticed outside. The humming sound was much louder here, resonating off the concrete walls. The stairs ended in a narrow corridor lined with pipes. Emergency lighting, battery-powered LED strips, provided that faint glow we'd seen from above. Someone had installed them recently, maybe within the last few months. The batteries in those units didn't last longer than that. Someone's maintaining this facility, I said. Actively maintaining it. The corridor opened into a large chamber, one of the old storage tanks, I realized, though most of the petroleum equipment had been removed. The space was maybe 40 feet across and 20 feet high, the concrete walls curving up to form a dome overhead. But what dominated the space wasn't the architecture. It was what hung in the center of the chamber. I'm a trained observer. I've documented hundreds of crime scenes, processed thousands of pieces of evidence. I'm used to seeing things that don't make sense at first, to working through confusion to find clarity. But what hung in that chamber, I still don't have words for it that make sense. It looked like a web, but not made of silk. The strands were thick, organic, glistening wet in the LED emergency lighting. They stretched from wall to wall, from floor to ceiling, creating a complex three-dimensional structure that seemed to have no pattern, but also no randomness. And suspended in that web, wrapped in cocoons of the same material, were two human-shaped forms. Dalton and Flynn. Had to be. Briggs moved forward, but I grabbed his arm. Don't touch anything. We don't know what that material is. We can't just leave them, he said. We're not leaving them, but we need to be smart about this. That substance could be toxic, acidic, anything. We need the right equipment before we try extraction. I pulled out my camera and started documenting the scene, forcing myself to work methodically, professionally, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The cocoons were suspended about 6 feet off the ground, positioned near the center of the web structure. I couldn't see faces or features through the wrapping, but the shapes were definitely human. Are they alive? Briggs asked quietly. I didn't know. I pulled out a handheld thermal scanner from my equipment bag. I always carried basic tools, even on what was supposed to be a simple missing persons search. I pointed it at the nearest cocoon and checked the reading. Body temperature 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal human temperature. They're alive, I said, not quite believing it myself. Or at least they're warm. We need to get them out of here. That's when the humming stopped. The silence was immediate and total. All the ambient sounds, the mechanical hum, the background noise of the facility, even the normal sounds of the swamp outside, just ceased, as if someone had hit a mute button on reality. Briggs and I both froze, our flashlights pointed at the web structure. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I saw movement, not in the cocoons, but in the web itself. The strands were vibrating, subtle but visible, as if something was moving through them. We need to leave, I said, right now. But before we could move, something emerged from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. It moved along the web strands with a fluid grace that was completely wrong for anything that large. And when my flashlight beam caught it fully, my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't a person, it was something else. Something that my brain kept trying to categorize and failing, sliding off it like water off oiled metal. The only clear impression I got was of too many joints, too many appendages, and eyes that reflected my flashlight with an intelligence that was utterly alien. "Move!" Briggs shouted, and we ran. Back through the corridor, up the stairs, through the control building. Behind us, I could hear sounds. Not footsteps exactly, but movement, rapid and purposeful, following us. The humming started again, but louder now, angry, rising to a pitch that hurt my ears. We burst out of the control building and ran toward the road, crashing through vegetation, not caring about noise or caution, just trying to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. I could hear Briggs breathing beside me, ragged and harsh, matching my own panicked rhythm. We reached their parked vehicle first. I yanked open the driver's door, intending to grab the keys and move it, but Briggs kept running toward our SUV. "Leave it," he shouted. "We need to go now." He was right. Whatever that thing was, it was still following us. I could hear it moving through the vegetation, could see branches moving in the beam of my flashlight. We reached our SUV, threw ourselves inside, and Briggs started the engine. He threw the vehicle into reverse, backing down Parish Road 447 at a speed that was completely unsafe. I braced myself against the doorframe as we bounced over potholes and scraped past vegetation. Through the rear window I could see movement on the road behind us, keeping pace with our vehicle even as Briggs accelerated. "It's following us," I said. "I see it." But then, abruptly, it stopped. The movement in our rearview mirror ceased, as if whatever was pursuing us had hit an invisible barrier. I watched as the darkness behind us became still. "Why did it stop?" I asked. Briggs didn't answer. He kept driving in reverse until we reached a wider section of road where he could turn around. Then we were driving forward, racing back toward the highway, our headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. I checked the odometer. We'd been at the 3.7-mile mark. Now we were passing 2.5 miles, then 1.8 miles. The road was exactly as we'd driven in. Same potholes, same curves, same vegetation. Except when I checked the GPS on my tablet, something was wrong. The log showed us driving forward toward the highway, but the distance wasn't matching. According to the GPS, we were only 1.2 miles from the highway entrance, but the odometer said we'd only driven 1.9 miles from the pumping station. "Briggs," I said, "check your odometer." He glanced at it, then at his GPS. I saw his jaw tighten. "They don't match. By almost a mile. We drove 3.7 miles to reach the pumping station. We should have 3.7 miles back. But your GPS is saying we're already at the highway," Briggs finished. And we were. The gap in the vegetation appeared in our headlights, the rusted gate, the junction with the paved road. We'd covered 3.7 miles according to the odometer, but according to every GPS device we had, we'd only driven 2.8 miles. A mile of Parish Road 47 had simply ceased to exist. Briggs pulled out onto the highway and didn't stop until we'd put 5 miles between us and that gate. Then he pulled over, killed the engine, and sat there breathing hard. "What the hell did we just see?" he finally asked. I didn't have an answer. I was still processing the evidence, the web structure, the cocoons, the thing that had followed us, the impossible geography of the road itself. None of it made sense. None of it fit into any framework I had for understanding reality. "We need to call this in," I said. "Full tactical response, hazmat team, medical support. Dalton and Flynn are alive, but they're trapped in there and we need to get them out." Briggs nodded and pulled out his phone. He had full signal here, 5 bars, perfect reception. He called it in, gave a terse summary of what we'd found, requested immediate support. The response came back within minutes. A tactical team was being mobilized. They'd meet us at the highway junction in 2 hours. We were ordered to maintain position, observe the road entrance, but not to enter again until support arrived. We sat there in the dark, watching that gap in the vegetation, both of us trying to process what we'd experienced. I pulled out Dalton's notebook and read through her entries again, looking for details I'd missed. She said the vehicle had turned around, I noted. She didn't remember turning it around, but when she looked at it, it was facing the opposite direction. "Like ours almost certainly is," Briggs said. We parked facing away from the highway. I'd bet anything that when the tactical team gets here and we drive back in, we'll find our SUV turned around too. But that's impossible. We were in it the whole time. We drove it out. Did we? Briggs looked at me. Or did we drive a different vehicle out? One that looks exactly like ours, but isn't? I wanted to reject that idea, but I couldn't. Because the evidence was pointing in a direction that my rational mind couldn't accept. That Parish Road 447 wasn't just an abandoned petroleum service road. It was something else. Something that didn't follow normal rules of geography or physics or reality. "The mile we lost," I said slowly, When we drove in, it was there, 3.7 miles from highway to pumping station. But when we drove out, that mile didn't exist. The GPS never recorded it. It's like it was never there. Or like it's only there sometimes, Briggs suggested. Like the road changes, expands, and contracts. I pulled up the aerial satellite images on my tablet, zooming in on the area where Parish Road 447 should be. The images showed nothing but vegetation. No road, no clearing, no pumping station. Just unbroken swamp. When were these images taken? I asked, checking the metadata. 2 months ago, but the road exists. We drove on it. We saw the pumping station. Maybe the satellites can't see it either, Briggs said. Maybe it's only visible when you're on it, or maybe it's only there when it wants to be found. We fell silent, both grappling with implications that were too large, too strange to fully process. I'm a scientist by training, an evidence technician by profession. I believe in empirical reality, in measurable phenomena, in explanations that can be tested and verified. But how do you test reality when reality itself seems to be unstable? The tactical team arrived exactly 2 hours later. 3 vehicles, 14 personnel, enough firepower to handle any conventional threat. The team leader, Agent Wyatt Carson, listened to our report with professional skepticism that gradually shifted to concern as we showed him the evidence. Dalton's notebook, the photos I'd taken, the Jeep's logs that showed the missing mile. You're telling me you found Dalton and Flynn alive, suspended in some kind of web structure, in an underground chamber that shouldn't exist, accessed by a road that changes length depending on when you measure it, he summarized. Yes, I said simply. I know how it sounds. But the evidence is solid, they're in there, and they need extraction. Carson looked at Briggs. You confirm all of this? Every word. We both saw it. Multiple independent observations, documented with equipment that's been calibrated and verified. This isn't hallucination or equipment malfunction. Something is happening on that road that we don't understand. Carson thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, we go in as a unit, full tactical protocols. Carson made his decision. We go in together, full strength, eyes open, weapons ready. If what you've described is accurate, we'll need to be prepared for anything. We entered Parish Road 447 at 23:45 hours. 3 vehicles in convoy maintaining visual contact, all equipped with GPS tracking, radio communication, and body cameras that would record everything we encountered. The first anomaly appeared within the first mile. I was in the lead vehicle with Carson and 2 other agents. I was monitoring the GPS and odometer, documenting our progress. At the 0.8 mile mark, according to the odometer, the GPS showed we'd only traveled the 0.5 miles. The gap was already appearing. Carson, I said, the measurements aren't matching. He checked his own equipment and confirmed what I was seeing. All units, this is lead. Be advised, we're experiencing GPS anomalies. Continue to monitor all tracking systems and report any discrepancies. The other vehicles confirmed. They were seeing the same thing. Physical distance traveled was exceeding the distance shown on GPS. The missing mile was already starting to manifest. At the 2.1 mile mark, we encountered something else. The road ahead split. 2 paths diverging at an angle, both looking equally used, both showing the same tire tracks from earlier. But when we'd driven this road hours earlier, there had been no split. The road had been a single route the entire way. Carson stopped the convoy. Holt, did you see any split in the road when you drove in earlier? No, I said firmly. The road was continuous, no branches, no alternative routes. Then where did this come from? I had no answer. The evidence of my eyes contradicted my memory. and both contradicted the GPS, which showed only a single route. But the split was real. I could see it, could see how the road divided, could see tire tracks going down both paths. "We need to choose," one of the other agents said. "But how do you choose between two paths when only one should exist?" I pulled out my camera and photographed both routes, documenting the split. Then I checked the tire tracks carefully. Both paths showed the same tread pattern, the same tires that had made the tracks we'd been following all along. "It's impossible for the same vehicle to have gone down both paths," I said. Unless it drove in twice," Carson finished. "Or unless the road duplicates things, reflects them." The thought sent a chill through me. What else might be duplicated on this road? What else might be reflected or copied or multiplied in ways that defied normal logic? Carson made a decision. "We take the right path. All vehicles maintain close formation. If we encounter anything unusual, we fall back immediately." The right path curved through the swamp, following the same general direction as the original road. But as we drove, I noticed more anomalies. Trees that I remembered passing on the left were now on the right. A distinctive fallen log that had blocked part of the road earlier was now completely gone. The landscape was similar but not identical, as if we were traveling through a mirror version of the route we'd taken before. At the 3.7-mile mark, or what should have been the 3.7-mile mark, we found the pumping station. But something was wrong. The facility was there, the same rusted structures and concrete pad we'd seen before. But the arrangement was different. The control building was on the opposite side of the complex. The storage tank entrance was in a different location. It was like looking at a photograph of the same place that had been flipped horizontally, everything present but reversed. "This isn't the same facility," I said. "Or it is, but it's inverted." Carson deployed his team quickly, establishing a perimeter and setting up lights. The facility was illuminated with harsh white light from portable LED arrays, making it look even more surreal. An industrial ruin lit up like a stage set in the middle of the Louisiana swamp. "Where did you find the access to the underground chamber?" Carson asked. I oriented myself, trying to match my memory to this reversed facility. "It should be there." I pointed to where the control building had been. But in this version of the facility, the control building was on the opposite side. We moved to the correct location, or what I thought was the correct location, and found the control building. It was similar to the one we'd found before, but not identical. The same general structure, but mirrored, with the door on the opposite side. Inside, there was no LED lantern on the desk, no notebook, no evidence that Dalton and Flynn had ever been here. "This is wrong," I said. "Earlier tonight, this room had a lantern and Dalton's notebook. Now they're gone." "Or we're in a different version of this building," Briggs suggested quietly. Carson's team searched the building thoroughly, but found nothing except decades-old equipment and dust. When they looked for the access hatch to the underground tanks, they found it, but it was sealed, rusted shut, looking like it hadn't been opened in years. "That hatch was open earlier," I insisted. "We went down through it. The stairs led to a chamber where Dalton and Flynn were suspended in some kind of web structure." "Then where is it now?" Carson asked, not accusingly, but genuinely wanting to understand. I had no answer. The facility was wrong. The road had been wrong. Everything about this place was wrong. And I was starting to understand why Dalton had written in her notebook that something is wrong with this place. The place itself was wrong. Not in a conventional sense, not damaged or dangerous or hostile in the normal meaning of those words, but wrong in a fundamental, reality-breaking way that I couldn't fully articulate. One of Carson's agents called out from outside, "Sir, you need to see this." We went outside to find the agent pointing at the road. Our 3 vehicles were still there, parked in formation where we'd left them. But now there were 4 vehicles, and the 4th one was ours. The SUV that Briggs and I had driven in earlier, the one we'd left behind at the 3.7-mile mark. Except we were at the 3.7-mile mark, and our original SUV was parked right here. "How?" Briggs started, then stopped, unable to finish the question. I approached the duplicate SUV carefully. It was identical to ours in every detail. Same model, same license plate, same small dent in the rear bumper that Briggs had gotten 3 weeks ago in a parking lot. The doors were unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. And when I checked the odometer, it showed exactly the same mileage as our current vehicle. I pulled out my camera and photographed everything, documenting the impossible duplication. Then I checked inside the vehicle and found something that made my blood run cold. My equipment bag was in the back seat, the same bag I'd brought with me tonight, containing my camera, scanner, evidence collection kit. But my bag was also in the vehicle I'd arrived in. I had 2 identical bags with identical equipment, showing identical signs of use. "We need to leave," I said quietly. "Right now. This place is doing something to us, duplicating us, creating copies of our equipment, our vehicles. We need to get out before it duplicates something worse." Carson seemed to understand. "All personnel return to vehicles. We're withdrawing immediately. Maintain visual contact. Report any anomalies." As we loaded up, one of the agents noticed something else. "Sir, the vehicle positions have changed. We parked facing into the facility. They're all facing out now." She was right. All 4 vehicles, including the duplicate, were now positioned to leave, pointed toward the road exit. But no one had moved them. No one had even gotten in them except to load equipment. "Get in and go," Carson ordered. "We're leaving now." The convoy moved out, all 4 vehicles this time, including the duplicate that no one wanted to leave behind, because leaving it felt like leaving a piece of ourselves. We drove back along the reversed road, watching the odometer count down from 3.7 miles to 0. But the numbers didn't match again. Physical distance traveled, 3.7 miles. GPS distance recorded 5.2 miles. We'd gained distance instead of losing it. The road had expanded instead of contracting. When we emerged onto the highway, I checked the time. We'd been on Parish Road 447 for 1 hour and 42 minutes, but my watch, and everyone else's, showed we'd been gone for 3 hours and 17 minutes. We'd lost time. Almost an hour and a half, just gone, vanished into the same void that had swallowed a mile of road and created duplicate vehicles. Carson called for an immediate debriefing at the highway junction. All personnel gathered around the vehicles, comparing notes, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. But as we talked, something became clear. Not everyone remembered the same things. 2 agents swore the road had never split. They'd driven a continuous route the whole way. Another agent insisted we'd only been on the road for 40 minutes, not 3 hours. My photo showed one version of events, but the body camera footage showed something slightly different. Angles that didn't match. Timestamps that were out of sequence. "It's like the road is affecting our memories," Briggs said. "Changing what we remember, or showing different people different versions of the same events. Or we're not all experiencing the same road," I suggested. "Maybe each person sees a slightly different version, and when we compare notes, the inconsistencies become apparent." Carson made a hard decision. "We're not going back in tonight. This requires specialized resources we don't have. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we risk more personnel." "But Dalton and Flynn are in there," I protested. "They're alive. We saw them." "Did we?" Carson asked quietly. "You saw something in an underground chamber. But when we went back, that chamber was sealed. The facility was different. Maybe what you saw was a different version of Dalton and Flynn, or maybe it wasn't them at all. The thought was horrifying. What if those cocoons had contained something else? What if the thing that had chased us had been showing us what we expected to see, luring us deeper into whatever that place was? But I couldn't accept that. The thermal scan had showed body temperature. The shape had been human. It had to be them. Carson ordered a perimeter established around the highway entrance to Parish Road 447. No one was to enter without explicit authorization. The tactical team would remain on site until specialized units could be brought in. Reality experts, if such people existed, physicists who understood whatever laws were being violated by that impossible road. Briggs and I were ordered to return to headquarters and write detailed reports on everything we'd experienced. Before we left, I took one last look at the gap in the vegetation, at that rusted gate hanging open, at the darkness beyond where Parish Road 447 began its impossible route into the swamp. Somewhere in there, Dalton and Flynn were waiting. Suspended in cocoons, kept alive by something that defied explanation, existing in a space where roads changed length and facilities reversed themselves and time itself became fluid. We had to get them back. We had to find a way to navigate that impossible geography and extract them safely. But first we had to understand what Parish Road 447 actually was. And I was starting to suspect that understanding might be impossible, because the road itself seemed designed to resist understanding, to change and shift whenever anyone tried to pin it down, to show different faces to different observers like some kind of quantum phenomenon writ large across geography. The drive back to headquarters took 3 hours. Or maybe it took 40 minutes. I couldn't trust my perception of time anymore. Couldn't be sure that the clock showing 0330 when we arrived was accurate, or if it had been affected by our exposure to whatever that road was. I spent the rest of the night writing my report, documenting everything I'd observed with the precision and detail that had made me good at this job. But even as I wrote, I noticed inconsistencies. Things I remembered clearly that didn't match the photos I'd taken, timestamps that didn't align properly, sequences of events that seemed to shift order depending on how I thought about them. The road was still affecting me, I realized. Whatever it had done to our perception while we were on it, the effects were lingering, making it difficult to establish a clear, consistent narrative. At 07:15, I finally finished my report and submitted it. Then I went to the evidence room to secure the physical items we'd recovered. Dalton's notebook, which I'd grabbed before leaving the control building, and my camera with its photos. Except when I checked the camera's memory card, half the photos were gone. Not deleted. The file numbers showed no gaps. But images I clearly remembered taking simply weren't there. The photo of the road splitting into 2 paths. Gone. The image of the duplicate SUV. Gone. What remained were only photos of the normal-looking parts of the facility. Images that would make sense to anyone who didn't know what we'd actually experienced. And Dalton's notebook had changed. The handwriting was still hers, but the final entries, the ones about hearing breathing in the tank and the vehicle turning around, were different now. Less desperate, more clinical, as if she'd been writing a standard evidence report rather than documenting something terrifying. The evidence was changing. Or maybe it had never been what I remembered in the first place. Maybe my memory had been affected from the moment we entered Parish Road 447, and I'd never actually seen what I thought I'd seen. That was the most disturbing possibility, that I couldn't trust my own observations, my own recollections, the very foundation of what made me useful as an evidence technician. I went home and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw that web structure, those cocoons, that thing moving along the strands with its too many joints and alien intelligence. And I thought about Dalton and Flynn trapped in whatever that place was, waiting for rescue that might never come because we couldn't navigate a road that refused to stay consistent. 3 days later, a specialized team arrived from an FBI research division I'd never heard of. They brought equipment I didn't recognize and didn't explain. They established a base camp at the highway junction and began making careful, measured incursions into Parish Road 447. They confirmed what we'd experienced. The road was unstable, its length variable, its geography shifting. But they also found something else. The road only exhibited these properties at night. During daylight hours, it was just an abandoned petroleum service road, 2.8 miles long, leading to a decommissioned facility that showed no signs of recent activity. The missing mile only existed after dark. The facility only reversed itself after dark. Whatever that thing in the underground chamber was, it was only present after dark. It's like the road has two states, one of the researchers explained to me. A day state and a night state. Same physical location, same basic structure, but fundamentally different properties depending on the light level. So we go in during the day, I said, when it's stable. Except Dalton and Flynn weren't there during the day searches. The cocoons, the web structure, the underground chamber, none of it exists in the day state. They're only present in the night state, which means that's the only time we can extract them. But the night state is unstable. We can't navigate it consistently. No, the researcher agreed. We can't. That's the problem we're trying to solve. They spent 2 weeks mapping Parish Road 447 in both states, documenting the differences, trying to find patterns in how it changed. They discovered that the night state wasn't completely random. It followed rules, just rules that didn't match normal physics or geography. The road's length varied based on the phase of the moon, for instance. During the new moon, it was at its shortest, only 1.9 miles. During the full moon, it stretched to over 5 miles. The facility's configuration reversed on a 29-day cycle, matching lunar phases. And the missing time was proportional to how long you spent on the road, roughly 1.2 minutes lost for every minute of real time spent there. Armed with this understanding, they planned a final extraction attempt. It would take place during a new moon, when the road was at its most stable, using vehicles equipped with experimental navigation systems that could track both normal GPS coordinates and the distorted space of the road itself. I volunteered to be part of the extraction team. Carson tried to talk me out of it, arguing that I'd already been exposed to the road's effects and might be particularly susceptible to further influence. But I insisted. Dalton and Flynn were my colleagues, my responsibility. I'd been the first to find them. I needed to be there when we brought them out. The extraction was scheduled for November 23rd during the new moon. The team consisted of 12 personnel, 3 vehicles, and enough equipment to handle any scenario we could imagine. We entered Parish Road 447 at 23:15 hours, when the road would be at its absolute most stable configuration. The navigation systems worked better than expected. By tracking both normal and distorted space simultaneously, they could compensate for the road's shifting geography, keeping us on course even when our senses suggested otherwise. The journey to the 3.7-mile mark, or the 1.9-mile mark in normal space, took exactly 47 minutes, with no significant anomalies. The facility was there, configured in its standard orientation, not reversed. We found the control building, found the access hatch, found the stairs leading down. And at the bottom, in the underground chamber, we found the web structure exactly as I remembered it. The cocoons were still there, still suspended in the center of the chamber, still registering body temperature on thermal scans. The extraction team moved in with specialized cutting equipment, carefully approaching the web structure while others maintained a perimeter watch for whatever had chased Briggs and me weeks earlier. They cut the first cocoon free, lowering it carefully to the ground. Medical personnel moved in immediately, scanning through the wrapping material to assess the person inside. Heart rate present, breathing shallow but steady. They began carefully cutting away the cocoon material, revealing. But that's where my memory gets confused again. I remember seeing Sarah Dalton's face as they pulled back the wrapping. I remember her eyes opening, confused and disoriented, but alive. I remember her trying to speak, though her voice was hoarse from weeks without use, but other members of the extraction team remember something different. They remember the cocoon being empty, just wrapping material around nothing. They remember confusion and disappointment that we'd come all this way to rescue someone who wasn't there. And when I checked the official report, it states that both cocoons were recovered but found to be empty. No human remains, no biological material, nothing except the strange organic substance that made up the web structure itself. But I know I saw her. I know Dalton was in that cocoon, alive, speaking. I know we extracted her and Flynn both, loaded them into the vehicles, drove them back to the highway, handed them over to medical teams who transported them to a hospital in New Orleans. I know this happened. I have memories of visiting Dalton in the hospital 3 days later, of seeing her recovering, weak but alive, unable to remember much about her time in the cocoon, but gradually regaining strength. Yet the official records say the extraction recovered nothing. Dalton and Flynn remain listed as missing, presumed dead. And when I try to visit Dalton at the hospital, the staff have no record of anyone by that name being admitted. My memories contradict reality. Or reality has changed since I formed those memories. Or I've been affected by Parish Road 447 in ways I don't fully understand. Ways that make me unable to distinguish between what actually happened and what I believe happened. I don't know which explanation is true. I don't know if I can trust my own mind anymore. What I do know is that Parish Road 447 is still there, still shifting between states, still creating duplicates and reversals and impossible geometries that defy understanding. The highway entrance remains guarded, but the road itself can't be sealed or destroyed. Attempts to bulldoze it fail, the equipment breaks down, or the workers become disoriented, or the road simply reappears the next day as if nothing had been done to it. And I know that sometimes, late at night, I receive phone calls from a number I don't recognize. When I answer, there's static, and then a voice, Sarah Dalton's voice, saying things I can't quite make out, as if she's calling from very far away, or from somewhere that exists at an angle to normal reality. Are these real calls, or am I imagining them? Are they my mind's way of coping with the guilt of failing to save her? Or is Dalton actually still alive, existing in some version of reality that I can't quite reach, trying to communicate across whatever barrier separates us? I don't have answers, just questions that multiply every time I examine them, contradictions that pile up until I can't distinguish between memory and imagination, between what I experienced and what I believed I experienced. Parish Road 447 is still on my caseload. It's still officially under investigation, but I don't go there anymore. I can't trust what I see there, can't trust what I remember after leaving. The road has gotten inside my head somehow, and I don't know how to get it out. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still there, actually, if I ever really left. Maybe I'm suspended in one of those cocoons, dreaming that I escaped, imagining a life outside the web while my body hangs motionless in that underground chamber. I have no way to verify which reality is real, and that's the most terrifying part. not knowing if this life I'm living is actual, or if I'm still lost on that impossible road, experiencing a hallucination of rescue while my true self remains trapped forever. The case remains open. The road remains there. And I remain uncertain whether I'm an investigator examining a mystery or a victim still trapped inside it. Some investigations don't end. Some roads don't lead anywhere. Some mysteries consume the people trying to solve them until there's nothing left but questions and contradictions, and the terrible suspicion that reality itself is less stable than we like to believe. I still write reports. I still document evidence. I still do my job. But I never look at Parish Road 447 on a map. Never drive past that highway junction. Never think too deeply about what happened there. Because when I do, the contradictions multiply, and I start to lose track of which memories are mine, and which might have been implanted by whatever that place is. And sometimes, in my notes from that night, I find entries I don't remember writing. Observations in my own handwriting that describe things I didn't see. Conclusions I never reached. Details that contradict everything else in the file. Am I writing these in my sleep? Am I being influenced somehow by the road, even though I'm miles away? Or are they being written by some other version of me, one who's still on Parish Road 447, still trying to document what he's experiencing, still trying to leave evidence for anyone who might come looking? I don't know. I can't know. And that uncertainty follows me everywhere, making me question not just what happened on that road, but everything that's happened since. The case remains open. The mystery remains unsolved. And I remain caught between competing versions of reality, unable to determine which one is true, unable to escape the lingering influence of a road that refuses to stay in one place or one state or one consistent configuration. Parish Road 447 has changed me. And I'll never know if what I've become is still entirely me, or if I'm part road now, part evidence, part mystery that will never be solved, because the solution exists in a space that humans weren't meant to access. Some investigations change you. This one unmade me. And I'm still trying to figure out how to put myself back together into something consistent, something real, something that exists in one place and one time and one version of reality. But I'm starting to suspect that's not possible anymore. That I'll spend the rest of my life between states, like Parish Road 447 itself, existing as multiple overlapping versions of myself, never quite solid, never quite real, never quite sure which memories are mine and which belong to some other Kyle Holt who's still on that impossible road, still searching for evidence, still trying to understand what can never be understood. The investigation continues. It always will. Because once you enter Parish Road 447, you never really leave. You just become part of the mystery, another data point in an ever-expanding file, another voice calling out from somewhere that might not exist in any stable, definable sense. And the road keeps waiting, keeps shifting, keeps calling to investigators and technicians and anyone who thinks they can understand it. Because that's what it does. That's what it is. A trap disguised as a mystery. A question that destroys anyone who tries to answer it. A place where reality becomes negotiable and every certainty dissolves into infinite possibilities. I'm still here, or I think I am. The evidence suggests I exist, that I'm writing this, that I'm real. But Parish Road 447 taught me that evidence can lie, that reality can shift, that the difference between what is and what might be is less clear than we want to believe. And so I remain uncertain about everything. About the road, about Dalton and Flynn, about what happened during those hours I can't fully remember or reconcile. 6 months after the extraction attempt, or the failed extraction attempt, or the extraction attempt that never happened, depending on which version of reality I'm experiencing, I started finding things. Small things at first. A field notebook in my desk drawer that I didn't remember purchasing. The handwriting inside was mine, documenting observations from Parish Road 447 during dates when I wasn't there. Or dates when I was there but experiencing something different. Or dates that never existed at all. One entry, dated 3 days after the extraction, described finding a third cocoon in the underground chamber. According to my own handwriting, this cocoon contained someone I didn't recognize at first. But when the wrapping was pulled back, I saw my own face looking back at me, eyes open but not quite conscious, breathing but not quite alive. I have no memory of writing this, no memory of this event occurring. But the handwriting is unmistakably mine, down to the way I cross my sevens and the slight leftward slant I developed after a hand injury in 2019. I showed the notebook to Briggs. He examined it carefully, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Kyle," he said slowly, "this isn't your notebook. Look at the property tag." I checked. The tag showed it was assigned to Marcus Flynn, the technician who'd disappeared with Dalton, but the handwriting inside was mine. "How is that possible?" I asked. Briggs didn't answer. He just closed the notebook and handed it back to me. "I think you should take some time off. Real time off. Away from this case, away from Louisiana. Let someone else handle the Parish Road 447 file for a while." I tried. I requested leave and spent 2 weeks in Colorado, staying with an old friend from college. Someone who had no connection to the FBI, or to Louisiana, or to any of this. I hiked in the mountains, breathed clean air, tried to reset my mind to something resembling normalcy. But even there, 1,000 miles from Parish Road 447, the inconsistencies followed me. I would wake up in the morning and find my hiking boots already muddy, as if I'd been out during the night. My friend mentioned seeing me leave the cabin at 3 a.m., but I had no memory of it. My fitness tracker showed I'd walked 7 miles during those hours, but I couldn't remember where I'd gone. And when I checked the photos on my phone, photos I didn't remember taking, they showed Louisiana swampland. Cypress trees and standing water and a narrow road winding through vegetation. In one photo, taken at 3:47 a.m. according to the timestamp, I could see the entrance to Parish Road 447, that rusted gate hanging open, inviting. I deleted the photos, but the next morning, they were back. I cut my leave short and returned to Louisiana. Something was wrong with me, something that went deeper than memory issues or confusion. Parish Road 447 had gotten into my head, and it was still there, still affecting me, still pulling me back even when I was physically far away. When I returned to the office, Special Agent Carson called me into a meeting. He was sitting with 2 people I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes, and a younger man who looked like he'd be more at home in a university than an FBI office. "Agent Holt," Carson said, "this is Dr. Rebecca Marsh and Dr. James Calloway. They're specialists in unusual cognitive phenomena." "Psychiatrists?" I asked, feeling defensive. "Neurologists," Marsh corrected gently, "with a focus on how extreme experiences can affect memory formation and recall. Agent Carson asked us to consult on your case because of the inconsistencies you've been experiencing." They spent 3 hours interviewing me, asking detailed questions about everything that had happened on Parish Road 447. Dr. Calloway took notes on a tablet while Dr. Marsh asked the questions, her voice calm and professional. "When you remember finding Sarah Dalton in the cocoon," she said, "can you describe the sequence of events in detail?" I walked through it again. The extraction team cutting the cocoon free, the medical personnel scanning it, cutting away the wrapping, Dalton's face emerging, her eyes opening, her trying to speak. "And you're certain this happened?" "As certain as I am that we're sitting here right now." Dr. Marsh and Dr. Calloway exchanged a glance. "Agent Holt," she said carefully, "what if I told you that level of certainty isn't reliable? That the human brain can construct false memories that feel completely real, especially under conditions of high stress or when exposed to environmental factors that affect normal cognitive processing?" "You think I imagined rescuing Dalton? We think Parish Road 447 might have affected your neurological function in ways we don't fully understand. The time distortions you experienced, the geographical inconsistencies, the duplicated objects, these all suggest exposure to some kind of phenomenon that interferes with normal sensory processing and memory formation." "But it's not just me," I protested. "Other people experience the same things. Briggs saw the duplicate vehicle. The whole extraction team saw the facility." "They saw a facility," Dr. Calloway said, speaking for the first time. "But did they all see the same facility? When you compare their reports, there are significant inconsistencies. Some people remember the control building in one location. Others remember it differently. Some remember spending 2 hours on site. Others remember 40 minutes. The timeline doesn't hold together when you examine it closely." "That's because the road affects reality itself," I said. "It changes things, duplicates things, makes time run differently." "Or," Dr. Marsh suggested gently, "it affects perception and memory in ways that make people believe reality is changing. The result is the same. People emerge with conflicting memories and experiences, but the mechanism is different. Instead of the environment changing, it's your brains that are changing, being influenced by something in that location." I wanted to reject this explanation, but I couldn't, because it made a terrible kind of sense. Everything I'd experienced could be explained by neurological interference rather than reality manipulation. And neurological interference was something that existed within known science, while reality manipulation was pure science fiction. "So, what do I do?" I asked. "You stay away from Parish Road 447, Dr. Marsh said firmly. "Whatever is affecting people who go there, whether it's an environmental toxin, unusual magnetic fields, or something else entirely, prolonged exposure seems to create lasting effects. The more time you spend there, the more your ability to form reliable memories deteriorates." She pulled out a document and slid it across the table. "We're recommending you be reassigned, effective immediately. You're off the Parish Road 447 case. Someone else will take over your responsibilities." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a strange sense of loss, as if something important was being taken away from me. "What about Dalton and Flynn?" I asked. "We just abandon them?" "According to official records, we've already conducted 3 extraction attempts," Carson said. "All unsuccessful. The search has been scaled back to periodic drone surveillance. If we detect any signs of the missing technicians, we'll respond. But active operations at the site are suspended indefinitely. Because you've decided the site makes people crazy." "Because we've lost enough personnel," Carson said sharply. "Marcus Flynn and Sarah Dalton are gone. You're experiencing ongoing cognitive effects. 2 members of the second extraction team have reported similar memory inconsistencies. We can't keep sending people into a location that damages them psychologically, especially when we haven't been able to achieve our objective." He was right, of course. From a resource management perspective, the decision made perfect sense, but it felt like giving up, like abandoning Dalton and Flynn to whatever had taken them. I accepted the reassignment. What choice did I have? I couldn't argue with neurologists and their brain scans showing anomalous activity patterns in my frontal cortex. I couldn't dispute the documented memory inconsistencies. All I could do was step away from the case and hope that distance would help me recover whatever normal cognitive function I'd once possessed. But stepping away from the case didn't mean the case stepped away from me. The phone calls continued. Sometimes it was Dalton's voice on the other end, sometimes Flynn's. Once, I swear it was my own voice telling me things I didn't know yet, warning me about events that hadn't happened. Or had happened, but I couldn't remember. Or would happen if I made certain choices. I started recording the calls, trying to capture evidence that they were real. But when I played back the recordings, they showed only static. Or sometimes silence. Or sometimes my own voice talking to myself, having a conversation where I played both parts. I saw a different psychiatrist, one not connected to the FBI or to the Parish Road 447 investigation. I told her about the calls, the lost time, the inconsistent memories. She diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder complicated by dissociative episodes. She prescribed medication and therapy and recommended I consider early retirement. The medication helped with the anxiety but did nothing for the inconsistencies. If anything, they got worse. I would find myself in places with no memory of traveling there. Once I woke up in my car, parked at the highway junction near Parish Road 447, with no recollection of driving the 3 hours from my apartment. My odometer showed I'd driven 247 miles, but the distance from my apartment to that junction was only 186 miles. Where had the extra 61 miles come from? I checked my GPS history. It showed a direct route from my apartment to the junction. No detours, no extra distance. But the odometer didn't lie. I'd physically driven 247 miles, unless the odometer was lying. Unless it had been affected by proximity to Parish Road 447, just like everything else. Or, unless I'd driven onto the road itself, spent time there in a fugue state, then driven back out with no memory of the experience but with the physical evidence of the extra miles recorded. I called Briggs from the highway junction. "I think I've been going back," I told him. "At night, when I'm not conscious of it. I think I'm being drawn back to the road." There was a long pause. "Kyle, listen to me carefully. You need to come back to the office right now. We need to talk about your fitness for duty. I'm not making this up. I'm sitting here right now, 3 hours from home, with no memory of how I got here. That's not PTSD or dissociation. That's the road affecting me. Or it's you affecting yourself," Briggs said quietly. "You're obsessed with this case. It's consumed you. And now you're acting out that obsession in ways you're not fully aware of. I'm not crazy. I didn't say you were, but you're not well, Kyle. You need help, and you need to accept that help before this gets worse." I drove back to the office. They put me on administrative leave, pending a full psychological evaluation. The evaluation took 3 days and involved more brain scans, cognitive tests, memory assessments, everything the Bureau could throw at me to determine if I was fit to continue as an agent. The results were inconclusive. My cognitive function was within normal parameters, but there were anomalies, small inconsistencies in how I processed spatial information, minor discrepancies in memory recall, patterns that suggested ongoing exposure to something that was affecting my neurological function. The good news, the evaluating psychiatrist told me, is that you're not experiencing psychosis or any other major mental health crisis. The bad news is that we don't know what's causing these anomalies or how to treat them. The patterns are unlike anything we've seen before. "Because they're caused by Parish Road 47, I said. "Because that place affects people in ways that don't fit into your diagnostic categories." "Maybe," she acknowledged. Or maybe the stress of the experience has caused some kind of subtle brain injury that we don't have the tools to properly detect. Either way, I can't certify you for active duty. I'm sorry. I was placed on indefinite medical leave. Not fired, not forced out, but effectively sidelined. I still had my badge and my credentials, but I wasn't assigned to any cases. I was told to focus on recovery, to work with therapists and neurologists, to give my brain time to heal. But how do you heal from something that's still affecting you? How do you recover when the thing that damaged you is still reaching out, still pulling at you, still drawing you back no matter how far away you try to stay? I spent the next 6 months in a kind of limbo. I went to therapy appointments and took my medications and tried to rebuild some kind of normal life. I dated a woman I met at a coffee shop, tried to explain my situation without sounding insane, watched the relationship fall apart when she found me standing in my backyard at 2 a.m., staring south toward Louisiana, mumbling about roads and cocoons and missing miles. I started keeping a detailed journal, documenting everything I experienced, trying to build a coherent narrative from the fragments of memory and experience I had left. But when I read back through the journal, I found entries I didn't remember writing, observations that contradicted earlier entries, whole pages that seemed to be written by someone else in my handwriting. On one page, dated 4 months after my medical leave began, I found this entry. Went back to the road tonight, 3rd time this week. The facility has changed again. The control building is gone entirely now, replaced by something else, something that looks like it's been there forever but wasn't there yesterday. I can feel the road inside my head now, rearranging things, changing my memories even as I form them. But I'm getting better at navigating it. I can stay on course for longer periods. I'm getting closer to finding them. I have no memory of writing this. No memory of going back to Parish Road 447. No memory of any of the events described. But when I checked my car's odometer, it showed I'd driven 512 miles since the last oil change. My GPS history showed only local trips, to the store, to therapy appointments, to the coffee shop where I'd met that woman whose name I was already forgetting. 512 miles unaccounted for. Roughly the distance of 6 round trips to Parish Road 407. I confronted myself about this. Sat down with the journal, with my car records, with every piece of evidence I could gather and tried to figure out what was happening to me. Was I experiencing dissociative fugue states where I was driving to the road without conscious awareness? Or was there another version of me, a duplicate, like the duplicate vehicles we'd found, who was making these trips while I remained unaware? Or was the road reaching into my mind from a distance, creating false memories of trips I'd never taken, planting evidence of visits that had never occurred? I couldn't determine which explanation was correct. All I knew was that I was losing time, losing memories, losing my grip on the basic question of what was real and what wasn't. Dr. Marsh called me one evening, 9 months after the extraction attempt. Her voice on the phone was professional but concerned. "Agent Holt, I wanted to inform you that we've had a development in the Parish Road 447 research." "What kind of development?" "We brought in a team from MIT, physicists specializing in spatial anomalies. They've been running experiments at the site, and they've discovered something interesting. The road doesn't just affect perception or memory, it affects actual physical space." "I could have told you that." "Yes, but we have measurements now. Proof. The road exists in a state of quantum uncertainty. It's simultaneously multiple different lengths, multiple different configurations, until it's directly observed. And even then, different observers collapse the wave function differently, seeing different versions of the road. That's impossible." "We thought so too. But the data is solid. Parish Road 447 is exhibiting properties that shouldn't exist at a macro scale. It's as if the entire road is behaving like a quantum particle, existing in superposition until measured. What does that mean for Dalton and Flynn? Dr. Marsh hesitated. It means they might exist in multiple states simultaneously, present and absent, alive and dead, rescued and still missing, all at the same time until the wave function collapses and one state becomes real. So some versions of reality have them rescued and other versions don't? Essentially, yes. And you, Agent Holt, seem to be experiencing multiple versions simultaneously. Your memories show evidence of both realities. The one where you rescued them and the one where you didn't. You're quantum entangled with the road somehow, experiencing both outcomes at once. I let this sink in. It sounded like science fiction, but it made more sense than any other explanation I'd been offered. Can it be fixed? Can you separate me from the road, collapse me into a single state? We don't know. You're the first documented case of a human being exhibiting quantum superposition at the neurological level. We're not sure what to do with you. The line went quiet. Finally, Dr. Marsh spoke again. There is one option, an experimental procedure. We could expose you to a strong enough observation field that it might force your wave function to collapse, consolidate your memories into a single consistent timeline. What's the risk? We don't know. It's never been attempted before. You might end up with complete memory loss. You might end up consolidated into the wrong version of reality, the one where you never went to Parish Road 447 at all, losing all your experiences and skills as an agent. Or the procedure might kill you outright. Or it might work. Or it might work, she agreed. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about living the rest of my life in this uncertain state, never knowing which memories were real, never knowing if the people I remembered saving had actually been saved. I thought about those phone calls from Dalton, or from myself, or from nothing at all. I thought about the journal entries I didn't remember writing and the miles I didn't remember driving. And I realized that this wasn't living. This was existing in a state of permanent uncertainty, quantum limbo, trapped between versions of reality like some kind of conscious Schrodinger's cat. I called Dr. Marsh back. Let's do it. The experimental procedure. Whatever the risk, it's better than this. They scheduled the procedure for 2 weeks later at a research facility in Massachusetts. I spent those 2 weeks putting my affairs in order, writing letters to family members in case I didn't survive, trying to make peace with whatever outcome would result. 3 days before the scheduled procedure, I received one final phone call. The voice on the other end was clear this time, unmistakable. It was Sarah Dalton. "Kyle," she said, and her voice sounded normal, healthy, alive. "Don't do the procedure, please. You'll kill us. Sarah? Where are you? Are you really there?" "I'm everywhere and nowhere. I'm in the road, Kyle. We both are, Marcus and I. We exist in the quantum uncertainty. When you collapse your wave function, you'll collapse ours too. You'll force reality to choose a single state, and that state might be the one where we don't exist at all. That doesn't make sense. You're either alive or you're not. No, we're both. We exist in superposition, just like you do now. In some versions of reality, you rescued us. In others, you didn't. In some, we died in those cocoons. In others, we're still there, waiting. As long as the uncertainty remains, all these versions exist simultaneously. We're alive in some of them. But if you collapse the wave function, you might choose a reality where we're dead. Or I might choose one where you're alive and rescued. You might. But it's a 1 in 7 chance, according to the probability calculations. 6 out of 7 possible outcomes result in our deaths. Is your certainty worth those odds? I sat there holding the phone, trying to understand what she was telling me. So I should just stay like this? Uncertain forever? It's not uncertainty, Kyle. It's possibility. It's existing in multiple states at once. It's strange and it's difficult, but it's also freedom in a way. Freedom from being locked into one single timeline, one single version of events. You can experience all the possibilities, all the outcomes, all at once. But I can't function like this. I can't work, can't maintain relationships, can't even trust my own memories. You'll learn. We did. Marcus and I, we've adapted to existing in quantum superposition. You can too. It takes time, but you can learn to navigate it, to choose which version of reality you want to experience at any given moment. And if I don't want that? If I want to be normal again? Her voice became sad. Then you'll have to accept that being normal means killing 6 out of 7 versions of us. Can you live with that choice? I canceled the procedure. Dr. Marsh was disappointed but understanding. It's your choice, she said. But I hope you realize that you're condemning yourself to a very difficult existence. I know, but I can't. I can't kill them, even if they're just quantum possibilities, even if they're not real in the conventional sense. I can't be responsible for collapsing their wave functions into death. So I remain here, in my apartment in Mobile, existing in superposition. Some days I'm an FBI agent on medical leave. Other days I'm an agent who successfully rescued Dalton and Flynn and returned to full duty. Other days I'm someone who never went to Parish Road 447 at all, whose life followed a different path entirely. I've learned to navigate the different versions, to hold multiple realities in my mind simultaneously without going mad. It's like learning a new language or a new way of thinking. Difficult at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Sometimes Dalton calls me, and we talk about her recovery, about her return to work, about the strange experience of existing in quantum limbo. Other times, Flynn calls, sharing his own experiences, comparing notes on how to maintain coherent identity while experiencing multiple timelines. And sometimes I call myself speaking to versions of Kyle Holt who made different choices, who exist in different probability branches. We share information, warn each other about potential dangers, try to navigate the quantum maze together. The journal has become more coherent now that I understand what's happening. Each entry is tagged with a probability signature, indicating which version of reality it belongs to. I can flip through the pages and see my life branching out into multiple timelines, each one equally real, each one a legitimate version of my existence. Parish Road 447 is still there, still shifting, still affecting people who venture onto it. But now I understand what it is. Not a road that changes reality, but a road that exists in multiple realities simultaneously, a quantum bridge between probability states. And I understand why I was affected so strongly by it. Some people can interact with quantum uncertainty without becoming entangled with it. But some of us, people whose brains are wired in certain ways, who have particular neurological patterns, we become part of the superposition. We collapse into the road's quantum state and begin existing in multiple timelines at once. It's not madness, it's not brain damage, it's quantum entanglement at the neurological level, a phenomenon that shouldn't be possible but undeniably is. I still work for the FBI in some versions of reality. In others, I've retired. In others still, I never left medical leave. All these versions are equally real, equally valid, equally me. And in all versions, I remember Parish Road 447. I remember the missing mile, the duplicate vehicles, the reversed facility. the thing in the underground chamber. I remember both rescuing Dalton and Flynn and failing to rescue them. I remember the phone calls that were real and the ones that weren't. Because all of it happened, and none of it happened. And the question of which version is real is meaningless when you exist in quantum superposition. The case file remains open in some timelines, closed in others. Parish Road 447 remains accessible in some versions of reality, sealed off in others. Dalton and Flynn are alive in some probability branches, dead in others, still trapped in cocoons in others still. And I remain split across all these possibilities, a quantum observer who can no longer fully collapse into a single state because doing so would mean choosing which version of my colleagues gets to exist and which version cease to be. It's a strange existence, but I've made my peace with it. Because the alternative, certainty, comes at too high a price. The road taught me that reality is more flexible than we like to believe. That observation shapes existence. That the questions we ask determine the answers we get. And the question Parish Road 447 forces us to ask is this: is it better to exist in one certain state or to exist in multiple possible states simultaneously? I chose possibility over certainty. I chose quantum superposition over collapsed wave function. I chose to remain entangled with Parish Road 447 and all its implications. And now I live in the space between realities, experiencing all the versions of my life at once, holding contradictory truths in my mind without contradiction, existing as a living example of quantum mechanics applied to human consciousness. Some days it's overwhelming, most days it's manageable, and on the best days it's actually liberating, to know that every choice I make branches into multiple outcomes, that every version of me exists simultaneously, that no single decision can truly be called a mistake because somewhere, in some timeline, I made a different choice and experienced a different outcome. Parish Road 447 didn't break me. It transformed me. It showed me that reality is far stranger and more complex than I'd ever imagined. And it gave me the ability to navigate that strangeness, to exist comfortably in uncertainty, to embrace quantum possibility rather than collapsing into false certainty. The investigation continues in some timelines. In others, it's long closed. In others still, it never began. But across all timelines, across all probability branches, one thing remains constant. I remember. I document, I bear witness to the impossible, the uncertain, the quantum. That's what makes me still useful to the Bureau, in the timelines where I still work for them. I can investigate cases that exist in multiple states, crimes that haven't quite collapsed into single definite outcomes, mysteries that resist conventional analysis because they exist in quantum superposition. I'm the agent you call when reality becomes negotiable, when the evidence contradicts itself, when witnesses remember different versions of the same events, when the crime scene exists in multiple configurations simultaneously. I'm Agent Kyle Holt, and I exist in quantum superposition. The road remains. The mystery endures. And I remain between states, between certainties, between the many possible versions of truth that compete for dominance in the space where Parish Road 447 has taught me to live. This is my case file, all versions of it, simultaneously. And somewhere in some timeline, Sarah Dalton and Marcus Flynn are reading this, understanding what I've done for them, grateful that I chose to remain uncertain rather than collapsing their possibility space into probable death. And in other timelines, they never read this because they never existed to read it. Both are true. All versions are true. That's what Parish Road 447 teaches you in the end. Reality is what you observe it to be, and if you can hold multiple observations in your mind at once, you can exist in multiple realities simultaneously. It's not madness, it's quantum mechanics, and it's where I live now.